Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Stephen was a boss who suits most of his subordinates. First and foremost, of course, was the paycheck. He not only paid people as much as he promised when they joined the firm, but everyone knew that in time, if it did not become a cashier, the line could count on a solid increase. There was a system of fines, but you had to seriously screw up to have some amount deducted from your income. Besides, the boss was not in the habit of humiliating those who worked for him, and overtime loads were always warned, and it was generously rewarded. But if not to abuse trust, the chief could always be asked off. One of the employees, who had a sick daughter for several months in a row, then broke down, then to take the child to take tests, then to pass a narrow specialist, then go to the procedures. But when the girl recovered, the mother went out of her way to do her job as best as possible and justify the trust. And finally, Stephen, although he was a middle-aged man, looked quite pleasant, slim, trim, smiling. Surprisingly, he was still unmarried, although he had had numerous affairs. Only once had he been frank and admitted that he had grown up in an orphanage, so it was harder for him than others to start a family. He has no experience of living in one. The educators really wanted me to be adopted, he said, because I had good parents, young, intelligent geologists who worked as geologists and died in an expedition, and there were no relatives who were ready to take the child. But I came to the orphanage as an adult. I was 12 years old, and potential parents always look at babies, preferably even infants, so I was never anyone's first choice. And yet Stephen was a prime example that even a child from an orphanage can achieve a lot. He had a big house in the best part of the city, a successful company by the river, and a branch office ready to open. Needless to say, he had a magnificent car, a small but very comfortable yacht. Overseas travel novels at Stephen happened often, but did not end in anything serious. So the ladies knew from the start. They had nothing to count on. However, they were not offended. Generous friends showered them with gifts and kept good relations with all of them. The more the staff was interested in a non-standard situation, when a new employee, Molly, came to the staff. She was a very young girl. She had just turned 19 years old. She studied by correspondence, and there were already several successful examples when the chief gave way to such young talents. As they say, put them on the wing. Molly was pretty with dark hair, huge eyes, and that nose. Her family was clearly not rich, and the staff had no doubt that the new girl would not last long. In a week, she would become the chief's new mistress. She was not even condemned, but quite understood. You have to feed yourself, girls. As long as she is not replaced by another girl, the chief's favor is guaranteed. But here's the amazing thing. Week after week, month after month, and no love story in sight, although Stephen was clearly flirting with Molly, complimenting her, giving her signs of attention. But the girl behaved so restrained, responded to the chief with such deference that he felt Lenin. Does she really think he is so old that she does not even consider him as her boyfriend? But when it was time for the New Year's corporate party, and the staff ordered a meal with delivery from the fanciest restaurant, Stephen still decided to break the resistance without touching. He made sure Molly tried a few cocktails himself. They were very pleasant to taste and yet strong. And then the chief invited the girl to his office. Supposedly he needed help with some paperwork, persuaded her to have a broader shake of cognac. Then one of the ladies furtively pulled the cabinet handle and snidely informed the others it was locked. All the same, our Michael got to know the chief's comfy couch. When after a while the couple joined the others, it was clear that the inevitable had happened. The chief was extremely pleased, and Molly was as red as a peony and wouldn't look anyone in the eye. The corporate party turned out to be wonderful. Guest artists performed. The food was amazing, and the people stayed up late when they finally started to leave. The chief said that he would personally drive Molly home, and the girl saw a woman in the doorway, whom the guard didn't want to let in. Molly's mom was rushing to meet her. "What took you so long?" the woman said with a soft rebuke. "I've been worried sick. I thought something was wrong. Finally, I couldn't stand it. I took a cab and came." The woman was dressed very modestly. Some shabby, artificial fur coat, boots, which in the market contemptuously called goodbye, youth, a white scarf. On the black-assed hair, Stephen gazed intently at the stranger and the review. Before them was Christina, the wife of his wayward friend Benjamin, with whom at one time he had been in love, and himself. Stephen had once had great difficulty adjusting to life in an orphanage. He grieved for his parents. He was a polite, sensitive, homely boy. He did not know how to stand up for his interests. Now he found himself in completely different conditions. The orphans took every opportunity to mock him, to take away something, to leave him hungry in the canteen. Stephen went so far that he cried at night from hunger and resentment. That's when he met Benjamin, who began to protect him. And even their fates were in some ways similar. Both were homesick, though Benjamin's life was so hard that he was hardly better off at home than in the state. Previously, he had lived in an old village house where Benjamin's mother's relatives and grandmother had gathered. Himself with his mother and numerous aunts unmarried, but fond of drinking. The house had fallen almost into disrepair. For many years, no one had neither money nor desire to bring it to the house. True, in the spring they dug a vegetable garden, planted vegetables, potatoes, onions, cabbage. We did it for practical reasons. If we had our own food, we had more money for vodka. Mother drank perhaps less than the others, but she had an irresistible urge to steal. As a little girl, she stole toys, brightly colored ribbons, and candy from her friends. When the girl became older, everyone knew Wendy better not to invite her into the house, or else something not to count. And when Benjamin went to first grade, his mother went to jail, stole a neighbor's pension she'd received the day before, threw a party at home. And when she didn't have enough money, she threatened another neighbor and demanded more money for booze. Maybe Wendy wouldn't have gotten jail time, but everyone who knew her just prayed that this thief couldn't live in the same village. Lock her up somewhere for a few years. Benjamin was given to an orphanage. None of the aunts wanted custody of him. Each had their own reasons for not taking responsibility for the boy. One had an injury. One was out of work. The third one seemed to be going to the city. That's what the aunts told the officials, but they didn't dare tell Benjamin the truth. The boy clung to them, looked into their eyes, begged them to keep him. "You'll live there for a while, and then we'll take you away." The aunts assured him, "We'll get back on our feet and come and get you. There are lots of kids there, plenty of toys. They feed you well, teach you, clothe you, shoe you. Just be patient." At first, Benjamin waited for the aunts to fulfill their promises. He was on duty at the window, ran to every doorbell. But the weeks passed, and Benjamin was not only not picked up, but not even visited. Then the nimble boy began to run home by himself, and as soon as he found his way, he hitchhiked home. He lied to drivers that he was going to his sick grandmother, and they gave him a ride. At home, his aunts and grandmother would grab their heads. They had to call the orphanage to get someone to come and take him back. "What is it with you kids? Doesn't anyone watch them?" If Benjamin ran away, the aunts were indignant, and the day came when the boy realized it was useless to hope that someone from the family would take him in. The aunts are lying to his eyes. He has to wait for his mother to get out of juvie. She'll take him back home. But Wendy, when she went out to get her son, didn't come back. She quickly got married and moved away. Then, rumor has it, she went back to prison. One way or another, Benjamin never saw her again. Wendy's parental rights were never revoked. Benjamin became bitter and had no more relations with any of his relatives. He now considered the orphanage his true home and began to settle in. Stephen did not know how Benjamin became friends with Christina. It happened before he himself got into the execution walls. It is known that the girl was an abandoned child. She was left at the maternity hospital by a young mother. Then the little girl was transferred to an orphanage, and then she went through all the paths on which such children go. Christina didn't know or even try to find out anything about her parents. She simply did not imagine any other life than in the state walls. She was the smallest and skinniest of the children who had joined the orphanage that year. Benjamin took pity on her as he would a stray and a kitten, and took to protecting her. He made sure she didn't get food taken away from her in the cafeteria if he himself got something tasty. He gave it to Christina, but that didn't happen very often. No one else dared lay a finger on the girl. And if she was offended by the teachers, with them invariably happened then something nasty, a slip on the stairs and something slippery, the least of which Benjamin Wine could not prove, though everyone realized it was him. In the end, even the most evil brought up stopped saying little Christina unpleasant things. On the look of the girl was then quite unassuming. She followed Benjamin like a shadow, and so they had as if formed within the walls of the orphanage their own little family. Then Stephen joined it. He himself did not know why Benjamin took pity on him, but he punched Stephen several times so hard to offenders, got a little of his life in the execution walls, and then in the form of the highest form of trust allowed him to be friends with Christina. But as far as school was concerned, Benjamin took a back seat. Stephen had always been a good student. It's true that after his parents died, he dropped out of school for a while. But then he realized that now in life he would have to make his own way and took up his mind again. He quickly became an excellent student at the school, where the children from the orphanage were studying. But since Stephen helped other kids, and those who couldn't be helped, he let them cheat. He was not teased nerd, on the contrary, tried to make friends with him. This helped the boy to finally fit into the team. Christina, when she went to school, also turned out to be a capable girl. She did not shine in all subjects, but some sciences were given to her surprisingly well. She was sent to the Olympiads in Russian and English. The teacher advised Christina to go further in this field. Maybe a translator. Where can you get a job? Talking to foreigners. It'll start. You have a whole different life. Or at least get a job at a development center. Teach English to kids. You'll make good money. Christina didn't say yes or no. She wasn't talking at all. She still followed Benjamin. She was friendly with Stephen. But it wasn't until the 8th grade that she suddenly looked almost indecently beautiful. She became a real beauty. People were looking at her on the street, but she didn't need anyone but Benjamin. From that moment on, the boys from the orphanage began to fall in love with Christina. They would do anything for her, and now not only Benjamin, but Stephen protected the girl from admirers who were ready for her to walk obediently or jump from the 2nd floor, and Benjamin started stealing. Mother's blood in him, after all. He got in touch with some scumbags who would clean kiosks, steal a passerby's purse, or cut off a girl's purse from her shoulder. And Benjamin himself doesn't seem to have done anything. Needed his share of the stolen goods. He used it to pamper Christina. He bought her chocolates and little things, nooks and crannies, perfume, shoes. What was going on at the orphanage back then? Christina, perfectly aware of where everything came from, was terribly afraid for Benjamin. She cried and said she didn't need any of it. The stuff she couldn't throw away. It was from the hen, but she tried to hide it so the caretakers wouldn't notice, and they almost always noticed anyway. You realize we're covering for you. We don't report you where we should. They reported you to Benjamin because they'll lock you up like your mother. Then you'll be completely lost. We're waiting for you to come to your senses, otherwise you'll go to jail for a long time. And Christina will find another guy. Benjamin looked gloomily at his girlfriend, but she only shook her head. She didn't want anyone else. Benjamin. Really. Stephen tried to influence his friend. We only have a little time left in school. Soon we'll start earning our own money. Then you'll be free to go. You've got good hands. You won't be out of work. By the way, the golden pen was a thief. Looks like Benjamin was cooking. And my hands are golden in the sense that gold sticks to them. Christina brought in some earrings the other day, and it's not hard to hide. She's gonna get out of here and wear them. All that was left was to wave goodbye. But Stephen tried to convince Christina. "With Benjamin, you'll get nowhere," he said. "You can't depend on him. And if you marry him, he won't change." But Christina couldn't be persuaded. "If it wasn't for Benjamin, I might not even be alive anymore," she said. You know, some old ladies are mean, how they mock the younger ones. And I couldn't fight back. If Benjamin hadn't stood up for me, I'd have been hounded. Well, it's understandable that you're grateful to him. But messing with someone like him is a lifelong commitment. You're capable, talented. You'll get an education if you want to thank him later. You'll have money and opportunities. Is such things measured in money? Christina objected. And what you're saying now, is it decent? He's your friend, and you're messing around with his girlfriend. Was I embarrassed? Stephen, I think I want you to do what's best for you. I love him. I just objected. But as it goes, so it goes. And I can't do without him anyway. To Christina's credit, it must be said that she never told Benjamin about the conversations Stephen had with her. And the young people's friendship remained strong until graduation. Shortly before the exams, two things happened. Benjamin stole another kiosk to celebrate the parting with friends. He was well aware that their roads would be further apart, and although he had promised his friends 100 times to stop stealing, this time they did not reproach him. They snuck out the window and spent the whole May night in the park. Christina and Stephen drank champagne. They ate expensive chocolates, and Benjamin topped himself up with vodka. Did they discuss plans? Stephen was going to go to a technical university. He had every chance of getting in. No one, neither teachers nor comrades, doubted that he would pass the exams well. "Have you decided where you will go?" he asked Benjamin. He looked regretfully at the bottle, which had little left in it. "And to the 30, he said. It was the former vocational school number 30, which was still not called 30 in the city, although now the school had the proud status of a lyceum. It was still possible to learn to be a bricklayer, plasterer, painter, and other working professions on the list. All the kids in the orphanage went to school there. A few years ago, Benjamin Sturhen's class took a field trip there. It was called Career Guidance. The foreman who took them around the classrooms and workshops whispered to someone, winked at them, and at the end of the event, they were taken to the canteen. Everyone remembered sweet, still warm buns and surprisingly tasty apple kissel for a long time. Stephen suspected that the good food was what had inclined Benjamin to choose the school. "But where are you going?" he asked Christina affectionately. "I thought you were going to be an elementary school teacher." In the teacher's college, Christina would pass by all means. And they're a dormitory, although small, but the scholarship and the opportunity to quickly get a specialty, with which you will definitely not be unemployed. In addition, Christina has always loved kids. In the shower, Stephen hoped that the couple in love would share life itself. Schools at different ends of the city. Each would have his own company, his own responsibilities. But Christina and Benjamin just looked at each other. "I'm not going anywhere now," Christina said. Pregnant, Stephen's jaw dropped. He knew, of course, that the orphanage girls were not childishly spinning a romance from their childhood years. But for some reason he thought Christina was different. He dreamed that someday he would take her to the registry office in a white dress, innocent and in love. Christina, however, had already thought of everything, and there was no doubt about that with Benjamin. It would be up to her to think and decide. "I talked to the teacher," she began, looking at Sophia's intertwined fingers. "She started early too. She said she couldn't bear it. We have to get on our feet first." But then she said nothing to the others. "We decided to have a wedding in our dining room at the same time as graduation. But it's a secret for now. You're the first one we're telling. She's a chemistry teacher. Her daughter just got married. She's got a dress hanging at home. She'll bring it so it'll be real. Tell me, what about getting married in a church?" Laughing Benjamin. Christina smiled and shook her head negatively. "And with housing, everything will be solved too. Benjamin's survivor's pension all these years went on the book. Will it be enough for any room? Maybe even an isolated small family?" I looked at the ad. We'll take the cheapest one we can find. We'll have time to renovate before the baby's born." Stephen bit his lip, and he only finds out about everything now, when his friends have already decided everything. Not that they'd kept it from him on purpose. It's just that they probably didn't think it was any of his business, so they didn't see fit to share it before. So the farewell in the park, which Benjamin had intended as a joke, turned out to be the real thing. In the days they were still to spend at the orphanage, Stephen saw his friends much less often. He pretended that he was immersed in books and studying hard for his exams. In reality, he just hated seeing Christina and Benjamin. He realized that they were both innocent, but at the same time he felt in his heart that they had betrayed him. They felt something and tried not to impose themselves. They had no time to go to so much trouble before the wedding. But Stephen didn't go to the graduation or the wedding. He agreed that the director gave him his certificate earlier than everyone else, and without any solemn ceremonies. The following days, he consoled himself with the fact that he had only 2 4s, the rest of the A's. That his orphanage buddy had gone to school to become a plumber and bought a shabby family in the oldest neighborhood in the city. And Stephen has a survivor's pension, too, a good one. And he still had his parents' apartment, which they rented out while he lived in the orphanage. This also brought a considerable amount of money into the account. Was there something to start life with? In the uni, Stephen passed with ease, bought his first car, and swore to himself that he would definitely spin out. He plunged into his studies, as they call it, with his head, and soon stood out among his classmates. But most of all, Stephen was eager to get acquainted, to look around, to see where he should go after graduation. That's what he needed most of all. He defended himself with a red diploma and got a place in a very promising company. The program even included overseas internships, if Stephen wanted to. With his abilities and diligence, he would probably become no less than a deputy director. But he himself did not wish it. And after a few years, having gained experience, he started his own firm. He had to start all over again, only to work with 10 men against the former. But Stephen, clenching his teeth, did not give up. In his apartment, he appeared only late at night and then for 4 hours to sleep. He recalled later that once he was so tired that he fell asleep in the corridor on a bench when he took off his shoes. In the morning, he woke up, put on his shoes, and hurried downstairs. He was already late for a client meeting. But there was more than just working with maximum dedication. Gradually, the money was coming in as well. He began to allow himself things he'd never dreamed of before. Not only while living in the orphanage, but also before, when his parents were still alive. Vacationing in foreign resorts every time he discovered a new country. Favorite restaurants, which he now visited regularly, club, where he had friends, and of course, women. He found them without difficulty. After all, he was young, good-looking, charming, and becoming more and more wealthy. With his former buddies he did not meet, there was neither time nor desire, but he did not let them out of his sight completely. He knew that Benjamin was drinking more and more, and Christina gave birth to a boy. The baby was born prematurely and had some kind of abnormality. Instead of breast milk, he needs a special expensive formula, which of course, there's no money for. Stephen has his assistant get an address for Christina and her husband. And since the couple had no bank cards, he sent Christina a money order. Knowing her character, he assumed that she could return the entire amount, although she was in dire need of it. Therefore, the transfer was practically anonymous. From an addressee with an unfamiliar surname, with a note from a distant relative. Thank God Christina accepted the money. She must have been under a lot of pressure. 2 years later, the couple had a second son. Benjamin worked wherever he could. His hands were really good. He was willingly hired. But not until the next binge. So soon he stopped looking for a place in his hometown. The notoriety ran ahead of him. Now he went to work somewhere far away, then to Siberia, then to the north, then to the Far East. Sometimes he brought back good money, and sometimes he disappeared. And then Christina had to look for him, call and write to anyone she could to get a trace of him. It was especially hard for her if the children were sick or something else happened that required an urgent investment of money. And yet a miracle happened in Christina's life. She really found a distant relative who at one time and insisted that the young mother signed a waiver of the baby. Where now was this mother? No one could say Nancy found Christina. She herself lived in another city. Couldn't make it. She was very sick, almost never got out of bed. And she didn't want to see her. The woman felt she didn't have long to live and only wanted to clear her conscience. A little redemption. Maybe if Vanessa had taken you in, she would have come to her senses, Nancy said over the phone. But I thought at the time that she couldn't handle the baby, that it would be on us, the family. And what did we do to deserve such a burden? I've had bad legs for years. It's not even easy for me to look after myself. Vanessa, my mom's remarried. She can't take care of her granddaughter. So I said to Vanessa, give her to the state and the orphanage. They will bring her up better than you will. Now I thought it would be possible to accept Christina in the family. And if not, at least visit her at the orphanage. It's not human to do that from time to time. Abandon the child and forgotten. That's what my son said. I'll bequeath him the apartment and the money I managed to put aside. And you a summer house. It's abandoned, but it's a nice place. My son doesn't go there and doesn't want to sell it. He's not very practical. He grew up with me. So in my will, I'll describe the cottage. So in my will, I'll leave the cottage to you. I don't want anything from you. Christina was confused. I've never even seen you. You don't owe me anything. It will be easier for me to go to the other world, said Nancy, if I know that I took care of you in some way. So if you want to sell the cottage, if you want to bring it up to date and take the children there for the summer, it's up to you. In short, I warned you not to be too surprised when you get your inheritance. Why don't you two live a little longer? Don't get your hopes up, you cut me off. But God grant you happiness. I'm sorry. What's my fault? With these words, she hung up the phone, and Christina could not recover from the strange conversation for a long time. Meanwhile, the last time Benjamin managed to earn very well. Christina had already got a job by this time. She never managed to finish teacher training school. No, she didn't. She dreamed of working in a library, but it was a utopia. If she was hired without special education, she would get very little. And Christina realized that the times when she became the main breadwinner of a small family would be repeated more and more often. The boys are growing up, they need more and more. And she got a job as a kitchen worker in the city health center. Dragged heavy barrels, tray, pots, peeled vegetables. But she always brought home some food in a pot, so I could even save part of my paycheck. How did you decide to give birth in such poverty? Comrades wondered. And two more. Wasn't it wise to wait until you got back on your feet? You can't choose your times. Christina said quietly. So you're also cultured. Why doesn't your husband take pity on you? He sent you to the worst job in the world. He didn't. Benjamin, however, did not insist on Christina working so hard. He'd just give her the money she earned, not forgetting to keep some for himself. And he'd settle down. When would he get his next paycheck? And would Christina have enough with the boys? Until then, it didn't bother him. But for 6 months, he'd been bringing good money back from the north. And Christina made up her mind. Let's sell the room, she told her husband. Add what you've earned. At the very least, we'll take out a small loan and buy a bigger place. What is this? The 4 of us in 15 meters. The second room was occupied by a military wife. He had a child of his own growing up. There were often quarrels between the boys. The women didn't always get along in the kitchen either. The military family had moved in even earlier. That's why both husband and wife felt they were the masters. They didn't like Benjamin drinking and talking loudly when he was home. Turns the TV on full blast. Christina, who grew up in an orphanage, was not a perfect hostess either, and the military wife often reprimanded her for escaped borscht or pasta stuck in the drains, sinks, and pasta. Maybe we'll even have enough for a 2-room apartment. You wish, Christina. Even if it was in any condition with fights, wallpaper, a dead push. I'd bring her home anyway, as long as I had my own place. Beginning of New Year holidays, and very fortunate, was the proposal Christina to work in the countryside year-round in a children's camp. On vacations, there were a lot of children, and in the kitchen labor was in short supply. The most important thing was that Christina could go there with the boys. They'd get a room for everyone and free food. And you will sell our place in the meantime, she admonished her husband. The room is in your name, so you'll have to sign the papers anyway. Be careful and don't drink, please, when you find buyers. Call me. I'll see what they're offering you. The New Year holidays flew by in a flash. The vacations that followed also flew by like a blink of an eye. Although the Christina children were still young, they enjoyed walking in the winter woods, exploring the playground, sliding down the slides in the evenings. Christina would bring a big bowl of hot rolls, sprinkle them with sugar, and the kids would fly them away. Watched cartoons. What could be better than that? Finally, when the people began to disperse, Christina saw her husband at the gate of the camp. It alarmed her at once. Why didn't he call, but came right away? And why did he look so strange, averting his eyes? Of course, with Benjamin one could always expect anything. But Christina was frightened in advance. What's wrong? Shouted out, before she could even run up to her husband. Do you understand? He continued to look away. It's this kind of thing. What's the matter? You can tell me I've been offered a good deal, but I think I'm in trouble. Christina slumped exhausted on a snow-covered bench. It turned out that Benjamin was his best friends, whom he knew so well from his work up north. They offered to trade him a room, but a cool foreign car. You sign a deed of gift for us, and tomorrow we'll race you the car and go to draw up all the documents for it. The car was shown in a photograph. It looked very presentable. And although Benjamin could not drive and did not know the brands, he was convinced that the exchange for him will be the most favorable. You will resell it in no time, the buddies assured him. She is worth 3 times more than your Veline with hands will tear off. And then you'll have no problem buying an apartment. See for yourself. You can sell a room like yours for 6 months. There's no conditions, no repairs, and we check everything in a matter of days. It's a rare surprise for you. Benjamin finally fell for it and signed the deed of gift. Christina and the kids were registered at a different address. They decided to do it in advance to make the sale quicker and easier. And now it's played against them. The room went into the hands of Benjamin, their friends, no car. And the next day, naturally, the guy didn't get one. He waited for 24 hours. Others on the 3rd with difficulty got through to one of the men. I'm sorry, dear. It's such a nuisance. He began to justify himself. The car had an accident and is being repaired. What about it? Benjamin was confused. My guys are coming back soon. Where would they go? Let's cancel the deed of gift. Don't worry. He'll fix your car up good as new. There's no way to cancel the deed. We've already bought your room. He's a very serious man. You better not argue with him, or they'll put you on the knife. It all seemed like a bad dream. Benjamin ran to his old address. The military wife, who had hated him before, literally clung to him. Benjamin, what have you done? The perfect thug and his family moved in. I'm walking through a wall now. Even my husband can't say a word to him. You can't get protection from the state yet. He won't even think about it. He'll just cut him. And that's it. Benjamin, come back. Cancel the deal. I won't say another word against you. Not to you or your wife. So what do we do now? It was the first time she'd ever seen her husband so confused. Should we go to a lawyer or something? You're smart. Give me a hint. You've ruined my life, Christina said quietly. Stephen told me right then, no matter how much I fight with you, it's all for nothing with this untimely pregnancy. You robbed me of my future. I could have gone to school and done something with my life. and when children were born. And so it went. Why do you see everything black? Benjamin said angrily. His wife had reproached him for almost the first time in his life, and he didn't like it. Have we lived so badly with you? Another man wouldn't earn as much as I brought you. Sometimes you agreed, and then nothing for 6 months. I moved from place to place, or a job worthy of you did not turn out, or friends cheated. Like now, they got money from the customer for all of them, and divided it among themselves, and they told you that the customer was a scoundrel who didn't pay. I know these cases, I call them. They don't tell you anything to the people you worked for. Everything was paid to the penny. Only Tabakov's earring has that money stuck to his hands. And when his son Dimka asked you to take a loan for a week until payday, you took it out on yourself, believing that Dimka would pay the money himself. But he couldn't fool a fool like you. He forgot the loan to his brother. How much? 90,000 there was. They wouldn't have allowed you to put the room on the market with the bank debt. I'm the one who paid it off. Benjamin was living at the door, while you were up north, cleaning out dumpsters. Cool, yeah. I was gonna lend books to libraries. I wanted to go to theaters, meet cultured people. Benjamin took offense. So you think I'm a physical therapist? Yeah. You were only good when you were brought to the orphanage alive, frozen, and everyone was trying to slap you around. I remember that. Christina looked him straight in the eye. That's why I put up with it for so long and never said anything to you, never reproached you with anything. And now you don't want to put up with it anymore. Well, look for a cultured man who will take you to the theaters. Benjamin put his hands in his pockets and walked away without looking back. He even seemed to be booed. Christina realized that she had deeply hurt his manhood. Knew, too, that he was going nowhere, that he might not have a place to sleep tonight. On the other hand, he hadn't asked where she and the kids would go from here from camp either. For a few days, Christina could have stayed with some of her friends, but now there was uncertainty ahead, and you can't burden strangers with your family for too long, especially when you have children. That's when she remembered about the aunt for luck and realized that she seemed to have no other way out. Her aunt said that her husband had once built a house so that she could live in it in winter. There's a stove or something. According to the owner's plan, the family was to spend New Year's and Christmas at the cottage. The nature around is gorgeous. The last days she could spend in the camp. Christina asked another kitchen worker to look after her boys and went for a reconnaissance. The news was both bad and good. The cabin was in disrepair, and it was a long walk to the nearest store. None of the neighbors were staying there for the winter. And this silence around was frightening. What if there was an unkind person nearby, and there was no one to call for help? On the other hand, the house had 2 rooms and a kitchen. There was no stove, but the dacha had light, heaters, the most necessary furniture, and even a small stock of food. Christina decided to take a risk. All day she cleaned the cabin, as she could make it cozy, and then brought the boys here. They were delighted when they realized the situation. So now they have their own house. In the garden you can sculpt a snowman, build your own slide, and no angry neighbors nearby. Now no one will constantly scold them, demanding that they do not run and make noise. Christina had a little money set aside, but she realized that she would not be able to live on this amount for long. Knowing Benjamin's character, she had no doubt that there was no help from him. Alimony? What kind of alimony, if he officially does not work anywhere and travels to all sorts of coven? She had the idea to go to the very girl for whom she paid the loan. It was very convenient for him to just forget about the debt. But Christina knew that with a probability of almost 100% she would not achieve anything. According to rumors, Dimashka lived with a girl who fully supported him. He himself preferred to lie on the couch and not work. He'd say, "Fuck you. If your husband's such a sucker, why did he believe me? It's not my fault." And several evenings in a row, Christina, until late at night, sat near the boys and thought her sons were open to her joke. Though the laughter was artificial, it was warmer. Christina was terribly afraid of catching the boys cold. How to treat in such conditions? It is impossible to call a doctor. In the end, there was another kind soul who agreed to look after the children. And Christina went to the city to see if she could count on a remote job. The last years she learned to do needlework quite well, sewing and knitting toys. Unusual, original, colorful. From her more than once bought kittens, puppies, a pony, and a dragon. The earnings, of course, tiny, but still. Christina knew a store that sold handmade products. Here came those who were tired of consumer goods and wanted something special. The negotiations with the owner were successful. Christina showed her pictures of her toys. She left a few animals. She wanted to go shopping for cheaper groceries, even though she knew she'd have to carry a heavy bag a long way. And she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw Stephen. She never thought she could run into him like that on the street. If she hadn't known him so well, she probably would have passed him by. Nothing else gave him away as a former orphanage boy who was happy just to have a piece of bread. An expensive coat, a groomed look. He came out of some institution on the main street. Christina hesitated for a moment, then caught up with the man and touched his sleeve. "Stephen, is that you?" He recognized her at once, though she realized she didn't look like much. Haggard, probably age. No makeup. Only her lips were painted with cheap red lipstick, so as not to look pathetic. But Stephen was genuinely pleased. There was no doubt about that. He bombarded her with questions. How she was here, and how long had she come alone or with her family, and how were she and Benjamin doing. Christina made no secret of it and told him that they were probably separated for good. She had never seen Stephen so excited. He suggested we sit somewhere and talk because you're going to lose your son again for 1,000 years, and I won't know where to find you. Christina looked at her watch and thought she would catch the last train. She had always felt so safe and secure with Stephen. Maybe now he could give her some good advice. He led her to a small, elegant restaurant and very tactfully placed her order. He realized that Christina would look at the menu with the French names of the dishes, about the way a goat would study a new gate, and they started with wine. Christina drank her glass in one gulp. She just wanted to calm down. That this was high-end ice cream, wine and pleasure was supposed to stretch. It hadn't even occurred to her. Sturhan didn't say much about himself. He only mentioned that his business was fine. He came here on a business trip. Married. Christina asked him straight out. She thought that someone might see her and Stephen, and if an old friend had a family, he could be in trouble. No, he shook his head with a sad smile. I haven't fallen in love with anyone yet. Why would I want a loveless marriage? I can have fun without a stamp in my passport. But Stephen asked about everything in detail, and the wine loosened her tongue. Benjamin left his kids outside in the winter, you know. He didn't even ask us where we were going or look for us. If he'd been running around my girlfriends, they'd have told me. No, he doesn't care. He was always sure I'd get my family out of any trouble, and the kids wouldn't be lost with me. I warned you. I quietly told Stephen this would happen. That's the way it is, not the other way around. Now I have to get down on my knees and apologize to you. Steriani, you were right. I was wrong. I was stupid. Only now it's too late, and you'll do something. Stephen asked. I'll plant a vegetable garden till spring. I'll feed myself somehow. Maybe work on David's dacha at home. I'll sell it, and me and the boys will move back to the city in some room. Where will you go at night now? Stephen said thoughtfully. There's someone to look after the children till morning. Let's go and spend the night. What am I in the hotel? Christina, inwardly aghast at the surprise of this proposal, and for the first time in her life waved at everything. And she was not. She called an acquaintance who was watching the children and said she would come in the morning. The acquaintance was a young girl, a student. She could stay the night at the cottage. Christina said they would pay her double. At first, Stephen tried to play the selfless friend, who was ready to give Christina his bed in the hotel suite, and himself to sleep on the sofa. But they woke up together in King Ice's wide bed. Stephen thought Christina was still asleep, and she was watching him from under the floor cover. By now, she knew for certain that she didn't love Stephen and could never love him. Even now, Benjamin worried her more. Meanwhile, Stephen had pulled several large bills from his wallet and quietly placed them in Christina's purse. It was enough to still challenge her with shame and hatred for him. She had been paid for a night of lovemaking as a person of easy behavior. Just as Stephen disappeared into the shower and the sound of running water was heard, Christina slipped out of the room. She was in such a hurry that she put on her coat and boots in the hallway. He wouldn't find her there, and he wouldn't even think of looking for her. If her own father did not dare to come to them even once, although theoretically he knew where the doctor was. At home, Christina appeared immensely guilty, immediately let the assistant go, paying her more than enough. And all day long she fiddled with the boys. Then there were a few very different days when all three of them, but they kept their heads down. Christina sowed her own bears or seeds. She told the boys stories and thought about the fact that if she had to winter here another winter, the house would have to be insulated for sure. She didn't feel well, but she put it down to depression. She wanted to lie down and cry. Christina kept thinking about how tired she was of the vicissitudes of life, how mercilessly fate had treated her. Exactly all the time tested for strength. Others had it so hard, much easier. She had never had a chance to get a grip, to get out of poverty. Christina lay with her back turned to the wall. Her eyes were closed and tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, why do you sleep all the time?" Her eldest son, John, was rubbing her. "What do you want?" "Christopher, and I want to eat." Christina forced herself to get up. Boiled potatoes in a jacket pot, chopped finely onions, poured lean butter, or fried pancakes. It was their usual meal. If the boys were not hungry, they did not pester her. They felt something. Did Christina eat? She didn't feel like eating. And she only drank tea, trying to save not more than one spoonful of Sahara in a cup. Her sons didn't recognize unsweetened tea, and the store was far away, and she didn't want to go there at all. But if we run out, we'll have to. Benjamin found them and came back empty-handed. And hungry, he didn't bring the boys anything, not even caramels. But his sons still hung on to him. Benjamin smiled confusedly. Of course, he didn't solve the problem or even try. He wondered if Christina was still mad at him. And maybe she had thought of something herself. "Mom, let Dad eat." John took off like a rocket and carried everything back to his father's. "I had to cook pasta on the stove." "Where do you live?" In a neutral voice, Christina asked, while Benjamin ate. He shrugged, not lifting his eyes from his plate. "When at your friends', how can they stand your drinking?" "When I just sleep in the entrance," he continued, "one or the other. Because they're already chasing me out of there." He grinned. Christina offered to have fun with that too. "Would you go to your north?" she said tiredly. "There you'll find a place in a wagon, but you won't go hungry. You told me that the watchmen eat in a bargain and pour you a bowl of soup. You just want me to earn money for the apartment faster. That's why you're hounding me." "No," I shook my head. "I don't need your money anymore. They don't bring happiness. They take it away." Benjamin was quiet. For a few seconds. "Christina, forgive me," he said at last. You could see how hard it was for him to say those words. Men hate to apologize, to admit they're wrong. There is even an anecdote about a man who seemed to say sorry, but actually said sheet. But Benjamin was silent, so he really did apologize in front of her. "You'll ask your sons for forgiveness when they're older," Christina said, "for leaving them homeless. I don't want anything from you. You despise me," pulling away. She devoted herself by the elbows, just like shutting yourself off from him. "Live your life as you wish. Be happy if you can. But don't you dare ruin my life again. I'll get my kids back on their feet." "What about you, Benjamin?" looking around at more kitchens. "This is where you'll live. Maybe I can stay with you too, but until spring. But not for long. I don't really have anywhere to live. My friends are boring the hell out of me. No jobs come up yet. I could be useful here. Shoveling snow, after all. Insulate the house or something. You know I can do anything." "Yeah," she said slowly. "You can do anything." His plate was already empty. Christina went to the door and opened it. "Go." She was small and thin compared to him. But he didn't dare to contradict her. He never took off his jacket. It was cold in the house. He pulled up the zipper signal and put on Christina's hat. "But if anything, you'll need it from outside. You know the number." Still got the phone. "Strangely left the SIM card," he admitted. "I'll get rich and buy a new phone. And myself. And the boys." "Go," she repeated and locked the door behind him. She was sure she was afraid he might come back, shutting him out like an enemy. And a few days later, Christina realized she was pregnant and was challenged by terror. She didn't wonder who the child was from, Benjamin or Stephen. She'd lost both of them anyway, and she wouldn't connect her life with either of them. But what was she to do now? She realized that she would give birth to this baby and pull it with all her might. But would it be enough? Had the orphanage changed something in her? Now she couldn't deny anyone the right to live. If a wasp flew into the room, Christina would pick it up with a toppled towel and throw it out the window, watching the wasp fly away. She would never step on a bug that knew the way. It was sentimentality on the verge of idiocy. But though life had toughened her up, she couldn't do it any other way. Now had to walk to town almost every day. Though like almost every pregnant Christina wanted to lie down and doze. Instead, she looked for buyers for the dacha, found out prices for housing. And here she was lucky almost for the first time in her life, offered in exchange for a house with a plot. Christina received a one-bedroom, let on the outskirts. The apartment had to be brought to mind. But the young woman almost did not cry from happiness. "We got the apartment from my grandmother. They told my wife to sign the documents. We wouldn't live there anyway. And in such a neighborhood, you can't rent it for a decent sum. And your cottage has such a wonderful place. The forest is close to the river. We'll use the cabin as a time, and we'll start building ourselves." Christina hurriedly signed the papers the notary gave her. She was afraid that everything would be taken away from her, but nothing was taken away. On the contrary, everything was left. Even the furniture. Christina perceived it as happiness. After all, not so long ago she had nothing of her own. And now she had a sideboard with dishes, and a round table covered with a knitted tablecloth, a bed for her and a sofa for the boys, and in the closet even an old linen stack. No, spouses who gave up such wealth were truly crazy. The lucky streak continued. Christina went to the family services office just to see if she'd get anything with 3 kids. Every penny was now a penny's worth, and they offered her a job. They were all over her at the Children's Rehabilitation Center. They needed a night nurse. No one agreed to spend the nights constantly looking after other people's children. Nannies agreed to night duty reluctantly, almost scandalously, and Christina had the same tears of gratitude to fate. It's not like carrying heavy cans in the kitchen. She surprisingly came to this job and often thought about how lucky the children in the rehabilitation center. Compared to those kids who went straight to boarding schools, the small building, converted from a former kindergarten, was cozy and warm. The groups were small, and in the rooms the pupils lived 2 by 2. They were fed to their heart's content and tasted good. Mecenas constantly gave something to the center. Then toys, then new fluffy, huge carpet in the game room, then a big TV, a real movie theater. But the fates of the children remained the same as many years ago. And this girl was left alone because she has only her mother, and she is being treated for tuberculosis, probably will not recover. The little brother has a sister, and his parents are drug addicts who abandoned their children long ago. They were raised by their grandmother and starved in the center. They couldn't wean them from carrying bread from the canteen and hiding it under the mattress behind the radiator. This boy has only a grandmother, too. Wouldn't even send him to school. Some kind of sectarian. She thought they'd teach him bad things. And Leshka was herding goats in the woods instead of studying. He came to the center as wild as Mowgli. Christina saw these children in the evening, and early in the morning another nanny came to pick them up. But in the evenings, Christina sat with the kids in the playroom and read them books or told them stories. The teachers thought that this would not interest their children. Cartoons, yes. But the guys somehow instinctively realized that Christina is the same as they have passed the same school of life, speaks the same language, and they flew to her as in a box. Plus, she was a great storyteller. What tormented Christina was that her own children were left unattended at this time. True, John had been well taught to lock the door, check it before bedtime, and not open it for strangers. Still, the neighborhood is far and few things, but the superintendent was so pleased with Christina's work that she allowed her, when there were places in the center, to bring the boys in the evening and tuck them in the spare room, and the cook in the kitchen often offered the young woman to take the food in the day room with her. The children here were fed to slaughter and much was left over. About Benjamin, Christina knew nothing and had no intention of finding out. She was sure she was doing the right thing, and now God was helping her. Yes, she bought going to the hotel with Stephen. But he wasn't married. She hadn't taken him away from anyone, and she was already punished for what she had done. Christina was well aware of what she was going through, until the baby she'd been promised at the ultrasound got back on her feet. As for Benjamin, better no father than one like that. Christina will not let him take anything away from her anymore. For her and the children, her former sense of awe and gratitude for what he had once done for her, now vaporized without a trace. Now, Christina was a mother first and foremost, and she took it from there. And then they found her and told her that Benjamin had died in the first minute. She didn't believe it and thought it was a prank, to make up for it. But the man in front of her, with his hat in his hand, told her everything. Benjamin had enlisted up north after all, and he'd gone as far as he'd ever gone before. As far as Yemelnenets, that's where he caught a cold. Probably went in the same jacket that he used to come to her dacha. Before, as a janitor, he was always given thick coats, nicknames for newcomers. But the ones they had were gone along with the room. And the new Benjamin probably didn't have time to get one or got one before he drank it. Anyway, he got pneumonia, which at first he proudly despised, and went to work with a fever. Then he was taken away by ambulance, as he was no longer thinking anything and was delirious. A week later, Benjamin died in intensive care. Guest, did you ask what to do with the body? They're not officially divorced. So it's up to the wife. How did you find me? Christina asked. It was very difficult along the chain. A few days just hanging on the phone, admitted the man. You could spit on everything and say to bury Benjamin in the city where he died. But would Christina's sons forgive her for that? And she gave almost all the money she earned to bring her husband, and very modestly, but buried in the local cemetery. And there was a funeral service, and she brought candy and cakes to the rehab center. At the wake, everything was honored. Now the children would know where their father's grave was. Christina shrugged her shoulders, feeling like a horse on which an exorbitant burden was put on a donkey. In such a situation would stand up and cannot stand, and the horse pulls from the last strength, and you have to be a donkey, otherwise you'll fall off. And then who to entrust the children to? Christina arranged with the superintendent that her boys would stay at the center while she was in the maternity ward. The girl Molly was born easily. Christina held her daughter in her arms and thought she was the most beautiful of her 3 children. A porcelain doll with dark eyebrows, eyelashes, and side-drinking hair at the orphanage. One girl had a German doll like that, how they all invite her. But it turned out to have the same vice as the rest of the kids, breast milk intolerance. Again, we had to pay for expensive formula. Christina herself was sometimes surprised at how conscious her boys were growing up. The same Christopher is still 2 tops from the pot, but already ready to look after his sister and change the film and hold the bottle. While the baby eats, Christina bought a screen door and created a corner for her and the baby. She tried to keep her daughter at night so that she would not cry and would not disturb the boys' sleep. And the boys were ready to nurse their little sister during the day. so that the mother could sleep at least an hour. That's how we had to live, clenching our teeth and work, work, work. Then life would sooner or later get back on track. When Molly went to kindergarten, Christina studied by correspondence and became a teacher, but she didn't want to leave the center. She said that working with troubled children paid more. But that was not the only reason. These kids needed her more than anyone else. When another child was brought to the center, he always cried and dreamed of going home. And the teachers would say the usual words, "Look how nice it is here, how many toys, and how many friends you will have with whom you will play here. Here's a pie, and don't cry." Christina had her own way with everyone. She'd just give them a hug and let them cry. Some she promised to go to their mom and arrange for her to come on Sunday. And no one's children are drawn to her, as it happens, a child from the center. Will he return to his family or send him, God forbid, to an orphanage? But even there, the guys remembered Christina, and they wrote her letters and called her to come visit. And some of them she visited. She was tormented by a feeling of guilt in front of her own children for the fact that they had no father, that they always lived hard and poor. Though Christina remained, as they used to say, of the people, did what she could for them. Looking ahead, once a gypsy guessed Christina that the fate of one of her sons will be such that no one expects, but nothing bad will happen to him. Inquired Christina. Though to believe such predictions was at least foolish. No, assured the gypsy. It's just that he's special to you. Give him to us in the Tabor, and we like him that way. But Christina only shook her head fearfully, and since then, she herself began to look closely at the edge. Slightly out of childhood, the boy took an interest in playing the guitar. First, someone in the yard showed him 3 chords. Then Christina bought her son a cheap instrument for his birthday, with which he never parted, and extracted from this guitar everything it was capable of. He had much more fanaticism than the kids who were put in music school by their parents and put up with this hard labor in order not to upset their ancestors. And then Christopher, fabulously lucky, his buddy, whom rich parents dreamed to see comprehensively developed, so launched music lessons, so by hand led from the specialty of choir and solfeggio, that his frustrated and distressed mother gave her son's guitar expensive imported. Frames Take My Numbskull will no longer take in his hands. The instrument refused decisively. And you have eyes for this case. I can see that. And Christopher is literally gone. Now no trail, no guitar hangout went by without him. Quickly he was picking up from the others. He practiced techniques by day, and by night, he became a true virtuoso. And then he told his mother he was leaving for St. Petersburg. What will you do there? Who is waiting for you there? Christina was confused and frightened. Mom, what kind of life awaits me here? Christopher, please. He also pressed his hand to his chest. It was a gesture she had never seen from him before. I never got to go to music school, and now it's too late. Yes, we have a music school, but without school I will not get there. And apart from music, I'm not interested in anything else in life. But I'll have to learn something, get a profession. I'll have to feed myself. So, I hate engineering. Economics too. I'll just ruin my life. If I stay here, we'll let you go. And Christina gave up. She just said guiltily, but everything is so expensive there, and I can't feed you and support you in another city. You know, you don't need anything. Mom, I'll do it myself. Don't worry about me. And don't be sad that we're splitting up. I'll keep coming back. He went to Peter and for 6 months sent only short messages that he was alive and well and everything was fine. Yeah, he called a couple times, asking about the family. And then Christopher came for a few days, and his family found out that he was now playing in the band, and they were carrying him in their arms. The band is getting more and more popular. There were concerts ahead, touring. Since that time, the novel appeared at home twice a year. He became famous with the musicians. He toured a lot. He was already known abroad. He would visit, and Christina felt indignantly that her son had become a different stranger to her. Their family simple news was far from him, and the things he told were not at all about the world in which they lived. Christopher was bringing in money that seemed to Christina to be enormous. She refused for a long time, and when he still insisted on his own, his mother took the bills, so that on the very next day, she could quietly put them into the account, which was opened in her son's name by a secret from him. She believed that while she was on her feet, she had no right to use her son's money. And Christopher can make his fabulous earnings unreliable, and not forever. And the day will come when he'll be penniless. That's when she'll give him the savings account. Sometimes Christina timidly asked the novelist if he had a girlfriend and if he was going to get married. "I do not insist, my son. I am not one of those to whom you do not put grandchildren. I just like to know, to be happy for you. If anything, you'll tell me. I'll tell Mom. If there's something to say. There's plenty of girls out there, but there's nothing serious in my life except music." And both mother and son smiled sadly. In this, Christopher was in the rhythm of a one lover who has not yet met the one who will be the only one for him all his life. Eldest son John was quite different. Christina had always viewed him as her right-hand man. He babysat his little sister too, and didn't shy away from doing women's work. Acquaintances invite Christina, "You have and help with the floors, and we'll cook dinner." Where do they get such golden boys? I'll tell you a secret. I got a gift version. Christina was joking around, but the truth is, her heart ached for John all the time. He always thought of others first, and then himself. And today, I guess he couldn't do that. When they went somewhere on the bus, Christina never remembered her son sitting for long. He always found someone to give up his seat. If not an old lady, then a middle-aged woman or even a girl. At school, it was John who the teachers often asked for help. He was unflappable. "How will you go to the army?" Christina was worried. "Everyone will ride you there. And not just those grandfathers. You'll call everyone to lend a shoulder. What fool wouldn't take advantage of that?" She remembered the orphanage life too well. If your father didn't know how to stand up for himself, she told her son, we'd both be lost. He protected himself and me. You realize that even goodness must have its fists. I go to the boxing gym. John smiled. It's not enough. There must be somewhere inside you the ability to fight back. If you get hurt, Christina saw her son off to the army. For good. No farewell table. No drinking with relatives. The mother just hung on John's chest and sobbed. Raised such a good, kind, strong man. Would he come back, or would he be broken there? He came back and suddenly announced to Christina that he was going to law school part-time and was going to work for the police. You can imagine he did. He soon calls us a family, a mom and 2 daughters. They live in a private house, and here comes a homeless guy. He just saw that the gate was not on the fence and came in, sat down in their hallway, and said that he wanted to eat and would not leave until he was fed. So they fed him. He said that he liked it here, and he would stay and so they persuaded him. But he wouldn't. Sits there like a king demanding tea. That's when they got on the phone. And when we arrived with the guys and took this young man under our arms, how grateful these poor people were to us. They almost bowed at our feet. They wouldn't have had the strength to cope with him. And then John was sent to Chechnya simply as a policeman to work for a few months. He went without any desire to leave his mother and sister, and he always thought that his place was in his hometown. And since then, he had been in touch with them for several months. He's been very sparing with his family. Short calls, half-page letters, and in March, Christina got a call that his son was lying in a military hospital. It happens, even though there doesn't seem to be a war. Whoever mutilated her son was never found. Christina forgot everything then, threw on a t-shirt that she wore as a teenager, sat by John's bedside in the ward. He was considered almost hopeless. For several months, the fever did not go down. She had no strength not only to get up, not even to sit up in bed. The doctors tried to prepare Christina for the fact that she would lose her son, but without raising her eyes, She stood in the corridor to get plates of hospital lunch, returned to the ward again, fed John from a spoon, did the laundry, did the dirtiest job of a nurse. She also cleaned up after other patients, even though she was so small and thin. She did everything so they wouldn't send her away. They left her here to be a son. And she got what she wanted. John started to get up, started to walk. But he was going to limp for the rest of his life. The fractures were very difficult. But Christina realized she had pulled her son through. For a while, they didn't talk about the future. What would John's health be like from now on? Would he have to be on disability, or would he be able to work as a police officer again? Both were silent on the subject, but Christina noticed that her son had changed a lot. His expression became withdrawn and rigid, as John had never been before. And the son was silent almost all the time, did not read, although before he was a real book to swallow. Now he lay more and more with his hands behind his head, immersed in himself, thinking. Well, finally, at last, Christina began to talk. We'll be going home soon. You'll be discharged next week. You're glad. And then John told her gently, I'm going home. If I go home, it won't be for long. Where do you think you're going? She shrieked involuntarily. You could almost hear the desperation in her voice. After all, I also want to leave me, like Christopher. In the shower. Had she hoped that it was with John that she would live out her life, that her son would forever be her support? No, she would never hang on his neck, would never stop her from arranging her own life. It was just that she had never been afraid around him. She wouldn't be afraid of not incoming old age or disease. John was the kind of man she wanted to have by her side. That being said, Christina swore to herself that no matter who John married, she would not say a word. She would step aside, would not interfere with the young, but on the contrary, would help them in every way she could. Christina never thought that her son would ever leave her. And now he spoke of it himself. Where are you going, to Moscow or Peter, like Christopher? No, Mom. There's a line from an old poem. I want silence. You must have burned your nerves. After what I saw out there, I want to be alone for a while. I got in touch with one of my friends. He's calling me to be a forest ranger. What are you gonna do with a broken leg in a job like that? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. John smiled, trying to distract his mother. Now I will go home anyway. I will recover, and then we'll see. Christina fervently began to convince her son that he would not be out of work if he did not have to return to the police. You can go to school, for example, a teacher of labor. John has a law degree. If his leg won't allow him to walk much, he can find a sedentary job in a court or in a private office, as a lawyer's assistant to a notary. John stroked her arm affectionately, but said neither yes nor no, and Christina realized with despair that it seemed that he had already decided everything for himself in his heart. That was a quality that could not be taken away from him. If anything, the subject was wrong in his head. You just do not hurry, she begged her son. Stand up first. Maybe not only the leg, but also your nerves under the stomach. He left after 3 months. John did not understand anything about the business he was to do, but was full of desire to learn. He was given a house not even on the outskirts of the village, but as if separate from everyone else. You had to walk to the outskirts. An old house and 2 birch trees. Since then, Christina came to visit her son together with his mother, and once at the girl's request, she left her here for the whole summer. Yes, it was probably the best place to settle her nerves. Silence, just the sound of leaves. Not far from the gate, 2 white goats grazed in the meadow. A rooster was keeping an eye on the hens, and on 3 sides of the road the forest was noisy. Christina saw that her son was changing for the better. He got a real tan, became stronger, began to joke sometimes, and sometimes seemed quite the same. And yet there was a break in him. Christina realized this when she saw her son, in the middle of a lively conversation, can suddenly fall silent again and go into his own unhappy thoughts, even if only briefly for a few moments. And he did get a local girl, and it looked like they were getting married. At least Christina could rest easy about that. The youngest daughter, Molly, turned out to be another gift of fate, rarely pretty. Outwardly, she was not like her brothers or her mother. Polyclinic and on the playgrounds at school and ballet studio girl admired. But she looked like a doll. That's a phrase that stuck with her mom. She was also an excellent student, and Christina didn't have to go through what she went through with her older children. When the parents of other children hinted to their children that it would not be worth it to get too close to the kids from a dysfunctional family, where the father drinks and the mother, though a hard worker, but from orphanages, from such good do not expect good. Molly had many girlfriends, and everything in her life seemed to go smoothly. Her brothers spoiled her. Especially the eldest John constantly made her sister some gifts, always sticking up for her. If in the evening she was late for classes in the club or performed on stage, he'd meet her and walk her home. Molly was slow to contact fans, spent her evenings at home. She sewed her own costumes for dance numbers. She inherited her golden hands. True, she was good at women's crafts. She sewed, embroidered, knitted. She graduated from school with a medal, but she chose her profession more than reasonably. "I like to do ballet, but I have no special abilities," she told her mother. "And in this field I will not achieve anything. I'd rather go to college and try to find a job that would make me happy and feed me." Christopher's brother called her to Peter. He rented a good apartment there and promised that she could live with him as long as she wanted. And even if she didn't get in, would it be a bad thing? To visit the northern capital, and he'll show her around. "What about your love life?" Molly asked jokingly. Christopher shrugged. "It's a 2-bedroom apartment. 1 room I'll allocate you, and I'll do without a bedroom and a music studio." But Molly did not accept the invitation and entered the institute in his city. She passed the competition bar easily. Mother did not even have to be nervous. However, it so happened that ties with former friends were interrupted. After school, everyone scattered as if from a gust of wind. Many girls chose large cities, and the university that chose Molly did not enter none, but long alone to stay youth cannot. And Molly had a friend for the first time. And it was a friend and nothing else. The guy was 10 years older than her. He was fat as fuck and had a funny last name, Little. He was a mama's boy, but in a good way. Just felt sorry for his elderly, feeble health, mom, even though she was a terrible bore. But Little got home on time every night, so that mom wouldn't worry. And he was home for both daughter and son, scrubbing floors and chopping. Feeding 2 Persian cats, my mother's favorite. My brother helped mom all the time too, Molly Little said when she got to know him a little better. That's where their betrayal began. And Molly saw Sergey exactly as an older brother. They sat together in classes and went out together in the institute canteen in the evenings. If we had free time and talked about everything in the world, we liked being friends with the MAI guy even more than with the girls. In their conversations there was no place for idle gossip. He read a lot, had a good sense of humor. They often joked with each other. Molly thought that this relationship would last forever. But then everything changed. Sergey's mother died, and immediately, as if from under the ground, a certain girl came out of the ground who clung to Little with a dead grip. Literally, when she was near Sergey, her hand was worn under his elbow. "Castle, where did you find her?" Molly asked. They were sitting in lectures. Only at the institute Little was getting freedom from Miss Lena. She worked as a saleswoman in a sporting goods store and looked at Molly with suspicion and almost with hatred. After all, Molly sat half the day in the institute auditorium next to her Sergey. Little shrugged guiltily. "Yes, it just happened. She started talking to me on the street. I said, but that's all. She's been my shadow ever since." Molly. She didn't want to believe it would last. She thought Little would be smart enough to stand up for his own freedom. But before he knew it, he was married, and after that, he was finally caught in the grip of the law. Sergey's apartment was sold because Lena found it impossible, too cramped, and the neighborhood is bad. And now to read Little was no time, all thoughts and forces about earning and paying the mortgage on time. With Molly, he could now only meet by chance and chat for a few minutes. Left alone, the girl began to wonder if she had made a mistake. No, it wasn't about her own failure to wrap her head around Christopher as her boyfriend. She'd never really accepted him. But now that she had Molly's degree, she wondered if she was in the right business. Her soul asked for romance, but at work it was numbers, reports, graphs, tables, and so from morning till night. True, the pay was good in the firm where she got a good job. And my friends immediately found my hairdresser that don't go to an expensive salon. Go to Vanessa. Who Molly, I was even confused. To Vanessa, she works at home, but she's a real pro, will make you a human being. Finally realizing that she had to be more decisive, one of the mutual acquaintances simply led her to this very Vanessa by the hand. Vanessa turned out to be a very pretty damsel, about 28 years old. Molly had always distrusted hairdressers. If they couldn't style their own hair and wore the hell out of it. Vanessa looked like a model, a waterfall of flawless blonde hair flowing down her shoulders, makeup, a work of art. At home, a pile of colors, jars, a tube of hair masks and face masks, scissors, 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 scissors. What's a hairdresser's shop? And Vanessa managed to keep up with her young daughter. When she looked at Molly, she rounded her eyes and asked, "Who did that to you?" "What are you talking about?" "I don't get it, girl." Vanessa picked up her hair. Dan, she'd recently dyed her hair that color and tried it herself. The light shone over her forehead. Vanessa fiddled with it all day, treated her hair with some imported products, recolored it, suffered from the grove, the end styled my naturally outstanding hair into a hairstyle. For a long time she did makeup, selecting shades with the thoroughness of an artist, a perfectionist. When Vanessa allowed me to look in the mirror, Molly didn't recognize herself. Sitting there was a beauty who had nothing to do with her. "Molly, you little office rat, I could put this one on the catwalk right now." After that, Molly, I started coming to Vanessa's, at least once a month. Make an appointment. The hairdresser's schedule was so busy. What about a pop star? My little daughter played in the manage. From time to time, her mother threw her new toys. Vanessa saw her husband once or twice. He worked as a remote programmer. He earned, God willing, and didn't give the family a penny. Lost all his money. Luck never turned his way once. But he never gave up trying to please this capricious lady. In the meantime, Vanessa kept the family together. Why didn't she try to free herself? Didn't shake off her husband like ballast that kept her from sailing on the sea of life? At ease, that's what she couldn't understand. As if there was in Vanessa something from an Oriental woman who a priori believes that the man is superior and he must be obeyed. And now Molly could not look at the blonde beauty without a slight feeling of pity. She herself constantly caught admiring glances. Sometimes she turned around, and it was pleasant. And no one knew that in the evenings she lay behind her screen and read fairy tales. Yes, rereading her children's books and dreaming of falling in love, just like the Little Mermaid. One day her mother came into her cubbyhole. She sat on the edge of the bed, stroked her shoulder, which was rare. Christina didn't usually have time for affection. "I loved fairy tales when I was a child, too," her mother said. "You did?" Molly was surprised. She had never seen her mother with a book in her hands. "Really?" Christina nodded. "In the orphanage sometimes, there were such moments that I wanted to kill myself only with fairy tales and save myself." "You're dreaming." "The fact that the Chief Stephen is looking after her." Molly, despite her lack of experience, realized quickly. Even a blind woman would have guessed it. Once, when the girl came into his office with papers, he offered her a glass of champagne. It was so unexpected that Molly stared at him, as in that folk saying of leprosy and new gates. Then he invited her to a concert. She said that she was not musical and did not like modern pop at all. "What do you like?" In his voice, he felt genuine interest. "Reading alone," Molly said. Here the topic was already difficult to continue. The chief had to nod and go about his business. But the new colleagues insisted that the boss will not leave the girl alone. I don't like him. Molly fought back. Come on. He's handsome. One of the girls persuaded her. But there's something missing in him. Some kind of masculinity. But he's got an ending. Pardon the vulgarity. And nobody's trying to convince you to marry him. He won't offer you one. It'll be quiet. But why not let yourself have some fun? Maybe he's taking you to Italy. He took Masha to Italy. Molly got off with a laugh. She was going to the corporate party quite calmly, not even assuming that something extraordinary could happen. She anticipated only a delicious dinner, music, and the opportunity to dance in the cafe. Molly was extremely rare. Not the right upbringing. This was supposed to be simple. It'd be an intimate gathering at work. You could stay late. And since everyone would be a little drunk, the girls would call a cab to take them home. And then there were cocktails, which I'd never had before. Surprisingly delicious, except they made me dizzy and lost my sense of reality. And when they were followed by cognac in the chief's office, now I wanted to cry. Why did everything happen so banal, like in a cheap love story? Only there the chief and the gray mouse, his subordinates, in the end, necessarily fall in love with each other, and she gives birth to his son, and even a double or even a triple. Molly, I was thinking about the fact that if she goes to work after the holidays, it will be only to write a letter of resignation. She'll never be able to see Stephen as a man. Some kind of vibe he lacks, and even if he built her a palace and sent her around the world in a ship, it wouldn't make things right. When her work came for her unexpectedly, Molly's mother felt immensely guilty. She knew how much of the three Christina's nerves were already on edge and how important it was to her that her daughter be home on time. Frosty outside, said Christina. And you are hiked up. Let's call a cab. That was a rarity, too. It wasn't that Christina didn't like spending money on cabs. She realized it was out of her hands. It wasn't hers. It was a way of life. To this day, every penny counts. One could take the bus to get there or walk. To Molly's amazement, the chief didn't leave. Stephen stood by like a lost man. I'll take you home, he said hastily, and even more astonished was the girl. When her mother simply replied, don't, Stephen, you've been drinking. I can smell it a mile away. We'll get there ourselves. Come on, Molly. Stephen didn't sleep that night. At first, he couldn't believe he'd met Christina again. After she'd vanished without a trace all those years ago, it really was like a stone in the water. And he never meant to hurt her. He knew how hard her life was. He sneaked her all the money he had in his purse. He knew she wouldn't take it out of his hand. Maybe she'd find it. She wouldn't be angry right away. Of course, he'd say she wasn't a beggar, but suddenly he'd get angry and keep it for himself, for sure she had so many needs. He would be ready to help her even then. But it had never occurred to him to propose to her. A whole life already stood between them. Stephen had become a hardened bachelor at heart. The thought of marriage terrified him. He was more than satisfied with the woman who ran his household, paid, and everything will be done the way he wants. Tired of it, he fired her. And the kids, there's no telling if they would have accepted him or not. Boys are a difficult age, and the sons, God forbid his temper comes out in them. Then it would be impossible to deal with them at all. And then Stephen challenged the idea that it was the girl he liked so much and who was now his mistress. Maybe his daughter, even if he and Christina had only one night together. But what the hell was the joke? He began to frantically remember how many years ago this meeting had taken place, how many years of MAI, and covered himself in cold sweat. Christina herself, well worn by life, looked now about 20 years older than him. But Molly was pretty. Does she look like him or Benjamin? Christina knows, of course, who her father is. But if the irreparable has happened, what is to be done? So far, Stephen has been treated like a table on which there were an inconceivable number of dishes, and the only thing left to do was to choose. Should he not try this one more? He was trying it. New resort, new club, new entertainment, new girls. And now, for the first time in his life, he was scared. Usually when he had a problem, he called his therapist. It was in step with the times, Stephen. And it wouldn't have occurred to you to get alcohol or cry to your friends. No, they're not stupid in the West. There, every well-to-do man goes to his own doctor. The therapist's name was Artur Igorovich. He was the most fashionable in town and expensive. A consultation with him cost a fortune. He was also famous as a dog sled traveler, and that added to his popularity. Women flowed to him, even though at heart he was Gene Hader. And Stephen was impressed by that. At one time, when he told the doctor his story, he blamed Christina for everything and justified the actions of his patient. In addition, he never once said that Stephen should have gotten married. In the therapist's opinion, his client would be happy just by remaining single. But what will he say this time? Can such a criminal mistake be justified? Or was there no mistake at all? Just a pretty despicable act. He took advantage of the inadequacy of a girl who was drunk for the first time, and through his own fault. No, he's gonna have to drink it himself. He'd pick up the phone at 500, then at 6 o'clock. He wanted to call Christina, but realized it was obscenely early. Had he and his daughter even slept that night? What and how had she told her mother? Stephen was holding his head, and at times as heavy as a bear. For the first time in many long years, he remembered the orphanage in his life so vividly. He was ashamed in front of the dead Benjamin. And in front of Christina and her daughter, he couldn't even say what he'd experienced. In the morning, Christina called himself. He saw an unfamiliar number on his cell phone and immediately guessed who it was. Yes, he said, and didn't recognize his voice. He coughed and repeated it. Yes. We need to talk, Christina said. But at any rate, he's not such a coward as to avoid this meeting. When and where? He asked. Apparently, she thought for a few minutes because he hastily suggested. At my work is not worth it. All the same will interfere. But there is a good cafe opposite the office. No, said Christina. And he literally saw her hard grin. I don't want to go to the cafe with you. I'll give you the address. Come to our house and we'll talk. He got the idea that she wanted him to show up as a groom, honor with flowers, and propose. Life had put her through its millstones, but Christina still remained a storyteller. My home would be gone, Christina said. She's gone to a friend's house, but come in the morning. Then I'll leave too. I'll get ready. And Christina hung up. Less than an hour had passed, and he was already outside her house. He didn't remember having been in this neighborhood before. There were old 5-story buildings, shy of the dirty courtyard. Of course, no intercom. So Stephen immediately rang the bell at the very door of the apartment on the 3rd floor. In the semi-darkness of the corridor, Christina seemed to him the same. The same small figure, the same dark hair lying on her shoulders. He handed her a luxurious bouquet of white and pink roses. Such gifts to favorite girls, they put them in a bucket, not in a vase. Come in, Christina said. She did put the flowers in a bucket. Probably there were not so many vases in the house to divide them into bouquets, and the skeptical simplicity of a small apartment. And behind the screen door, Stephen's mom's bed must have gotten even grosser on her soul. Christina pointed him to the sofa herself, sat opposite, straight, stern. She didn't offer tea or coffee. Christina. He mustered up the courage not to go around. Yes, around. You, I think you've told mine. And I think you know what happened yesterday. She nodded and said nothing more. She didn't come at him with reproach. I was terribly guilty, and I wanted to make my proposal, to ask her to marry me. Marry her she won't regret. I'll do anything to make sure she won't regret it. She'll have everything I can give her. Christina shook her head slowly. Or did he take his hand to his throat? Did he want to help himself to talk? Or is she my daughter? At one time I didn't know whose daughter she was, Christina said. But when Benjamin died, I pulled myself together and did the test, and she's Molly. Stephen dropped his head to his chest. He could finally breathe. She won't marry you, Christina also said dryly. I'm sorry, Stephen. And rich, and you have a firm and a business. You own factories, newspapers, steamships. But there's just something about you. I couldn't love you. And mine won't either. And you can't really love her. You can't love anyone but yourself. But I ruined her life. Stephen didn't try to get out of it. I could have tried to redeem myself somehow. Isn't that a lot of honor to take on? The last thing he expected was to hear Christina say those words. She'll forget what happened sooner or later. But if she gets involved with you and gives you a piece of her life to run away on a soap heel, yeah, she learned a lesson, albeit a hard one, but it's just a lesson. It's not a tragedy. So what do you want me to do for her? Stephen asked, and then he added, and for you too. You realize that she will leave your firm now, Christina said. The girl has no connections. It will be hard for her if you help her, not because of what you did, but in memory of our former friendship. You remember how we were friends with Benjamin, all three of us. That's probably fair. You know, third hand somehow, and she won't take you. Did you tell Molly about us? He asked. Christina nodded. Yes, she and I have always been and will always be honest with each other. It's not easy for her right now, but she'll recover. She may look weak, but she is strong. What can you do for me? Take me to the train station. You're leaving. Fear has awakened in him again. Of what? Of me. Where are you going? To the train station. Christina repeated. It leaves in an hour and a half. Just then, he noticed a wheeled bag in the corner. Let's go, he said, standing up. The car is downstairs. On the way, he tried to ask her about how she had lived all these years, about her children. I'm sorry, Christina said. The subject is closed to our lives. I don't want to let you in. For a few minutes, they drove in silence. And I take it you're still single. Christina was staring at herself. And it looks like I'm not going to have anything serious in my life. Christina, I will not ask you about yours, but you have always been great, as it is said, about the soul of the soul and poison. She interjected, having heard it more than once. You always knew what was in everyone's soul. I could predict what was going to happen next. Tell me, please, am I going to be alone in life like this? What do they say about women? A celibate veil. Am I wearing a crown or something? Why is my love life not working out? He asked. But he kind of knew her answer. Now she would say, because you don't need anyone yourself. Can you get married? Said Christina tiredly. Just don't be under any illusions that you'll be loved. If you openly see that a girl is attracted to your money, marry the one you want. But why such a girl? Because only soulmates make a good family. Christina shrugged. If you want someone to look over you in your old age, make a marriage contract and live with your eyes open. You and your spouse have a business arrangement. You her youth, beauty full of obedience, like in the East. And for her, a life of luxury while you're alive, and a bank account. After you're dead. Majorca was 100 times worse than me. Did you love him? Who told you he was worse? Yes, he drank himself to death. But he knew how to love when he was young. And you don't have that in you. Absolutely. That's how people don't have the gift of music, or can't draw. You can't fight it. You can't make it work. When they arrived at the station for train 3, they were already boarding. Where are you going? Once again he asked, already not hoping that she would answer him. But Christina answered to her eldest son to John's apartment, leaving Molly behind. If she wants to, she'll stay in town. If she wants to, she'll move. I've never stood in the way of my children. And he needs me now. I can feel it in my heart. He's out in the middle of nowhere. I have to take a train, then a bus. John works as a forester. He lives in a cabin with no facilities. That doesn't scare me. We've been there. But we need to warm our hearts right now. He and me and him. Did he call you? No, he won't. I can just feel it. I told you, you called me. How's that for a soul? Christina climbed up on the step of the carriage. Stephen helped her lift her bag. She nodded and went straight inside. The train had already pulled away from the platform, and Stephen followed it. For some reason, he waited for Christina to come out into the vestibule, and they would look at each other, and the snow would fly, covering her black hair and white, similar shawl.
Subscribe and click the bell.
The Salisbury couple had been married for more than 10 years. They met at a sporting event in Moscow. Both Adriana and Michael loved running. At first they did it for fun, but then they wanted to get not only pleasure, but also a reward. Therefore, even before they met, Adriana and Michael wanted the same thing, to win a running competition. They ran to the finish line at almost the same time. The man was only a couple seconds ahead of her, but decided to cede the prize to Adriana, as she was such a beautiful delight that he couldn't resist her to get the stranger's attention and get her number. He decided to give her the gold cup, and so began a romantic relationship between two strong and intelligent people. At first, Adriana and Michael's relationship resembled a roller coaster, then crazy passion, then cold meetings. But then a miracle happened, and they were able to find common ground, and their relationship turned into something beautiful. They learned what happy stability was, or so Adriana thought. Michael was unhappy with a lot of things about the relationship. However, he did not hurry to share his thoughts with his beloved, because he knew that it would lead to a scandal. The man was afraid that if he expressed his opinion, his wife would leave him. And she was the ideal for him. And Adriana was a tall and blue-eyed blonde with a lush bust, thin Italy, and pumped legs. They call them purses nowadays, and Michael was a skinny-eyed brunette. He looked much younger than his years. He was 35, and Alina was only 30. Harmony reigned in their relationship. For about 10 years, no serious quarrels, money sharing, and even jealousy. That is why Michael made an offer, and on their anniversary, the girl was very happy and responded with consent. But who would not agree to marry the person they love? The wedding they played lavishly. On the day of the wedding, Salisbury was practically the whole town. Everything changed at one moment when Adriana's legs suddenly started to hurt. It turned out that the girl had problems with her joints, and she was categorically not allowed to do sports, but she neglected it. As a result, and the line was to undergo a long and expensive treatment, to walk again without pain. The girl really hoped that her husband would support her during the illness, but Michael did not care. He constantly wanted a physical manifestation of love, and Adriana could not give it to him because she was ill. At first, the man wanted to divorce immediately, but then changed his mind. His wife had too many advantages, and he didn't want to share the business in the divorce. Michael hired the best doctors for his wife, but she only got worse. From time to time, the man thought about a mistress, but he was stopped by the thought that he could get some kind of infection. Venereal disease, or worse, he would have to pay for sex with a woman, and he didn't like hiding, ciphering, and deceiving others. So Michael decided to get back into sports. At first it helped him. His whole head was filled with useful exercises. He learned to run faster and began to prepare for the next competition. But after a month, the man began to be annoyed by domestic issues. His wife stopped not only sleeping with him, but also cleaning, and a little later forgot about cooking. Michael did not want to go into direct conflict with Adriana, so he began to look for a maid, who for an additional fee will also cook. The businessman could not live long without a home-cooked meal. At first, the man entrusted the search for a maid to his wife, but noticing what candidate she selects, he decided to do the search himself. At first, only elderly women, students, and inexperienced ladies with children came to his interview. But when the man specifically emphasized the age, things went much better in the questionnaire. In a week, the man managed to look through more than 200 questionnaires and stopped at 3. The first girl could do everything in the kitchen, but she could not cope with cleaning the house. The second candidate lied about her age and was not even 18. And the third girl was perfect. Tall, brown eyes, brunette named Betty. impressed the man not only with her references, but also stunningly outfits for cleaning. Michael immediately made the decision to hire a third candidate for the job. The businessman did not listen to the protest of his beloved. He brazenly stated that he had to hire additional staff because of her illness, not because of his own whim. Perhaps the businessman's choice was influenced by his emotional and physical hunger. When you have a gorgeous woman in front of you, and she is ready to fulfill all your whims, you begin to succumb to her charms willy-nilly. At first, Betty only cleaned and cooked. Michael didn't respond to her flirting, but the outfits became more and more seductive and spectacular. And Adriana occasionally joked that the maid is a little over the top and confuses work with a modeling agency. But the woman's illness began to progress, so she had no time to keep an eye on the new employee. Betty did not immediately like Michael. He looked quite decent. He wore an expensive watch on his hand. His body was dressed in a luxurious suit of blue color. The girl grew up in a poor family, and she always wanted to meet a rich man, but she had never met such a man on her way. Perhaps the problem was that the girl was always lost at work, and there was no time to go to expensive restaurants. And she never saw successful men in ordinary cafes. Initially, Betty was a very purposeful girl, but already closer to 30 and just bored with work. However, the girl evaluated herself and did not want to become an escort. Betty found a different way out. She decided to go elite maid. This job not only brings a lot of money, but also expands the circle of acquaintances. It is by working as a maid, you can meet a rich man in Moscow. After Betty got a job at the agency, she had already had 2 relationships with folders, but they were deeply married and were not going to change anything in their lives. So despite her love for money, Betty was running away from her rich suitors. At the first opportunity, she already wanted to become the wife of a rich businessman herself. Therefore, the girl changed employers every month. However, after 3 months, Betty was tired of running from one house to another, and her last hope was for a new order in the center of Moscow. But the owner of the house, named Michael, as it turned out, was also married. When Betty learned that her next customer was married, she decided to forget about her dream and began to fulfill her work duties in the hope of saving up for a car. The month was drawing to a close. The girl wanted to get a raise on top of her basic paycheck, and in order not to ask directly from Betty, used a proven method. She began to experiment with dishes, serving on the table only the delights of the kitchen, and the housemaid tried to wipe the house to a shine. It was with this that she won Michael over. Of course, he noticed how hard his new employee was trying and literally gave her $100,000 in cash. However, when the man learned that Betty was not going to stay for another month, he was very upset and began to think about how to dissuade her from changing employers. Nothing interesting came to mind, so Michael called his business partner, and if she is as wonderful in intimacy as she is in the kitchen, then I will definitely use all her services, Michael said on the phone to his friend Alfred from Sweden. His business partner and comrade responded to his ironic statement as follows: "Why do you need all this? Be patient for another month. Maybe your wife will soon get back on her feet. She is insanely beautiful. If you want to cheat on her, maybe you should get a divorce. Don't torture Adriana." Michael frowned and whispered angrily into the phone, "Are you even on my side or not? You know how long it took me to eat properly before Betty showed up. And I'm not talking about marital duty, and Adriana is just my eternal must." There was laughter on the other line, and after a brief argument, Michael and Alfred decided to change the subject. After all, they are about to sign another contract. It was Betty's last day at work at Michael's. She cooked a sumptuous dinner, laid out the dishes, poured the wine, and later cleaned up. She loved working in this house. It was rarely dirty. The man was clearly picking on his wife. He bore a line of brain for an hour from a single napkin lying on the table. Thank God I'm a maid and not his wife, Betty thought. The girl's musings were interrupted by Michael, who ran into the house and began quickly gathering some papers into a pile and taking pictures. The maid looked at the man excitedly and asked what's wrong. The businessman first brushed her off and then replied that his wife would soon go to Germany for treatment. Doctors at one of the hospitals promised quick results. In 2 weeks, Adriana would be healthy again, just like before. Betty's eyes lit up. Was this really the chance to get a rich husband or not? Though why would she need such a tedious spouse? After a short deliberation, the girl decided to leave the house and asked for the maid's last paycheck. I wanted to do the right thing and not to break someone else's family. But as soon as the girl tried to open her mouth and ask for payment for services, Sergei jumped up from behind his desk and ran to his office. Betty did not. Curious as to why the man had taken off so abruptly, she went to the door of his office. At first, some shouting and swearing could be heard, and then the man blurted out that he was so nervous about his lack of marital duty and hung up the phone. At that moment, Betty realized that she had to stay in this house for at least 2 weeks. Michael may be the one who is her chance for a happy and trouble-free life. When the man came out of the study, Betty had already managed to step away from the door and make an innocent appearance. The girl started a conversation with Michael about payment and at the same time complained about the problems with his office, asking to work another 14 days in his house. The man agreed, but asked the maid to stay out of his way during the negotiations and to keep out of sight. Betty was surprised that Michael reacted so coldly and angrily to her request, but decided to go through with it. For the first few days, Michael was hardly ever at home. The man celebrated his wife's departure and her future recovery. Michael had already changed his mind about cheating on his wife, but he was drawn to Betty like a magnet. After Michael hired a maid in his house, he began to have constant erotic dreams, in which Betty was always present in his dreams. The girl was always only in black lingerie and would kneel before him, begging him not to punish her for the broken vase. It was because of sexual hunger and frightening dreams that the man decided to go on a bender with his friends. He did everything he could to avoid seeing the insanely sexy brunette in front of him again, but he didn't want to fire her. Michael was afraid that he could at any moment lose control of himself and cross the line in their relationship, and this would not only destroy their marriage with Adriana, but also force him to show his true colors. Returning after another party, the man had a snack and went to shower, forgetting that he had a maid working in the house. A hangover sometimes knocks a person out of balance, making him forget about everything while Michael washed off his fatigue and the unpleasant odor of alcohol. Someone was already taking over his house. As soon as the man tried to get out of the shower stall, he heard a heartbreaking scream that was clearly coming from the pantry. The man turned off the water, threw a towel over himself, and rushed toward the room from which the noise was coming. Betty stationed herself in one of the rooms. I don't think Michael will be coming today. Everything went well at first. The girl undressed, and it was left to her to put on top of herself the official uniform of the company. But suddenly, the maid staggered back and leaned against the window. And then a pot of sand fell on her. Her first reaction to the falling pot was to scream. She spent mad money on one of the best molds in Moscow. It was hardly washable. The material was very delicate. The uniform cost as much as 3 of her shifts. That's why after the yelling, the swear words came out. The girl would have kept on yelling if the storeroom door had not suddenly opened. In front of her stood her employer named Michael, wrapped in a single towel. The man's hair was as wet as his entire body. It was on the cake that the most water droplets had accumulated. At first, Betty felt a slight wave of arousal at seeing a naked Michael, but then she lowered her eyes down. The girl felt ashamed of the situation. First the screaming, and now she was standing in her underwear near the broken pot. The situation couldn't get any worse. Opening the door, the young businessman expected to see anything but a sexual fantasy come to life in front of his nose. Michael made a remark to Betty about the mess and hurriedly retreated so the maid wouldn't notice his arousal. Sexual hunger was taking a very negative toll on the man's body. As he left the pantry, the man was angry with himself, for he wanted so badly to cheat on his wife right now. His body's desires were stronger than his mind. He felt like he was losing control, and knew how this could turn out for everyone. When the potty incident was over, the work at the maid's office went on as usual until the evening. Already close to 20:00, the girl decided to come to Michael's office for payment. But as soon as she came to the office door, she suddenly wanted to play with the boss. The maid noticed in the morning that the man got excited when he saw her in her underwear, and she wanted to know how much he was attracted to her. Because of her ruined shape, the girl had to work all day in a red dress, but it was quite long. So Betty decided to make it a little shorter since the girl was studying to be a designer. Changing the length of her cape was not difficult for her. The cut, made with simple scissors, turned out to be quite beautiful. Walking into Michael's office after knocking, the girl asked for payment and then pretended to drop her brooch. Next, Betty erotically bent over and began to look for it. The man noticed that the maid's dress had definitely gotten shorter, but thought he was just imagining it. However, when Betty bent over, his heart began to tap away, and this time his patience broke. Michael approached Betty from behind and slowly slid his hand around her waist, starting to move lower, and then pulled the girl to him. The maid sighed loudly as she rose from her knees, removed the man's hands, and turned around to face him. It seemed as if Betty was about to slap Michael, for she was drilling him with her gaze. However, the girl suddenly drew him to her and drew him into a passionate kiss. With slow defections, the couple reached the bed. The businessman unbuttoned and removed Betty's dress in a couple of minutes and then threw it away. The maid, on the other hand, tried to delay the undressing process. She took off his jacket, then stretched his shirt for a long time, paying attention to every button. Already after 15 minutes, the couple had completely undressed and began to have fun on the bed. Michael was not on sit-in, and Betty, already after 2:00, she asked him to stop. But suddenly, the man grabbed the girl by the throat and began to choke Betty, looking around and did not know what to do. The maid started to just gasp on the bed, and soon she just passed out. After coming to her senses, Betty looked around the room and noticed that Michael was no longer here, but there was breakfast on a tray and a note on the bed nearby. Betty was trembling with fear. It seemed to her that her boss was about to burst into the room and finish what he had started. Half an hour later, when the panic attack subsided and it was clear to the girl that no one was home, she quickly dressed and opened the note that was lying on the bed. It said the following: "Sorry, for last night everything was super on your part, but I don't know how to contain my emotions. I have aggression issues, but I'm working on myself. It won't happen again. I promise. I hope you don't go to the police, because my lawyers will deal with you pretty quickly. Kisses, Michael." After reading the note, the girl began to have mixed feelings. Her mind was screaming that she was looking at a psychopath, but her heart wanted to believe that it was just an unfortunate mistake. After all, a long abstinence and stress could well provoke such behavior in a man. The girl decided to continue the relationship with Sergey and tried no longer to provoke him to emotions even in terms of sex. Therefore, she removed all vulgar outfits from her closet. All 2 weeks, the couple practically did not get out of bed, and if they got out, only to change the place of rest. Betty even made it to Michael's workplace, but the lovers' happiness didn't last long. When before the arrival of Adriana was only 1 day, the truly beastly gut Michael again came out. The man asked the maid to come early to discuss the terms of her stay on the job. After all, Betty had only asked for 14 days, and they were almost over. The girl, naturally, asked the man to extend the contract for another month. Michael almost immediately agreed, but after signing the contract, he suddenly hesitated and said, "You can stay. But there is one thing." The maid preceded and interrupted Michael, and then said, "If you're about your wife, then don't worry. I'm not going to tell her about our affair." Suddenly, the man's eyes warmed with anger. Betty, it didn't seem as if Michael was about to explode like a time bomb. But he pulled himself together and quietly continued his monologue. "No, that's not what I mean. If we're going to continue sleeping together, you need to know what I want. I don't want just sex. I want more violence, use handcuffs, belts, and more." At first, the maid was amused, but then she decided to clarify something. "What do you mean by a lot of other things? Not strangulation, I hope." The man smiled falsely and said no, of course not. Betty, but was confused by Michael's answer. So she quickly picked up the money from the table and turned toward the door to make a quick exit. She practically reached for the handle when she suddenly felt someone holding her hair. After a couple seconds, the man dragged the girl to the back of the office, entered a strange combination on the safe, and a door opened in the wall. Michael then threw the girl to the floor. The hidden room went in himself and closed the door behind him. The hidden room was illuminated by dim flashlights, so it was impossible to see the surroundings. Although Betty resisted with all her might, Michael was stronger and did not let her break free. Once in the secret room, the maid didn't know how to fight off the man or where to run. She had already regretted 100 times that she had stayed in this house and decided to have an affair with her boss. Betty was beginning to realize that she was willing to do anything to survive, and if need be, she would kill the man in self-defense. Michael, yes, dragged the maid to the bed and lay down next to her. Tearing his clothes off, he tried to strangle her but was interrupted by a phone call. This time there were ghastly red marks on Betty's skin, and the girl felt that something was wrong with her neck. The girl suddenly realized that if she could escape now, Michael could easily be put behind bars. The injuries she had sustained should have been enough to file a police report. While the man was talking to his wife and Lena on the phone, the maid had time not only to assess her injuries, but also to think over a plan of escape. She saw a metal alarm clock near the bed and managed to grab it in her hand. As soon as Michael turned towards her, Betty hit the man with the alarm clock on the head after hitting and splitting his eyebrow. The businessman instantly lost consciousness. The girl checked her tormentor's pulse and made sure he was alive. She began to realize the plan to escape. Grabbing the phone, the maid stepped over the body of Michael, who half cut off the bed, and ran towards the door with the code. Checking the latest notes on her iPhone, the girl saw a strange combination of numbers. Then she used the code she saw to lock the system, and the door opened. It was through ingenuity and luck that the girl was able to escape. When Betty reached home, she immediately called the police, giving a statement to the interrogation. The girl hoped for the integrity of the police officers and did not alarm the media. But a week later, she got a call saying that the case was closed. Allegedly, someone saw how the girl had injured herself and blamed Michael for everything. It was clear that the businessman had bribed witnesses, but it was good if he cooled off afterwards. And what if he didn't? At first, Betty tried to forget about the boss assault incident, but her office was a constant reminder of all her past employers. Some clients don't want maids to work with. That's why apps are constantly advertising non-liquid employers. The blacklist of maids also included Michael, which is not surprising. And it's not as if Michael was just an app. After the strangulation, the girl began to notice that her neck ached incessantly and a terrible cough appeared. Betty decided to take a break from work and went to the hospital hoping to forget about the past. The doctor, after examination and tests, told the girl that she had displaced vertebrae in her neck, and to be fully rehabilitated, a lot of money must be spent. Betty, she was at a dead end. After all, she had just recently paid off most of her savings for a new apartment. It was the last mortgage bill. The maid made the decision to once again go to the authorities and sue Michael. She realized that if she won her case, her medical treatment would be paid for, so the man could not pay off again. Betty decided to find Michael's other victims and take statements from them. The maid was certain that she was far from the first girl Michael had attacked. Betty first of all decided to complain to the wife of the cheater, as she was sure that she must know more about him than the others. Adriana had only recently returned from Germany, but she was already glowing from the inside like a sunshine. Her legs were no longer sore, and she could even run on the treadmill. When she returned home, however, she was saddened by the fact that her husband did not greet her immediately. It was after a brief interaction with her spouse. It seemed to her that it was physically impossible for him to say hello. Her hunch was confirmed when she saw that on the back of Michael's head painted a bloody cut. Toward evening, Adriana decided to talk to her husband again after discussing his treatment in Germany. The girl decided to broach the subject of the incident in the house and started the conversation with the following questions. "Honey, what happened to your head? Did you at least treat the wound? Why is the house such a mess?" The maid was supposed to stay for another month. Michael made a cute face and quietly replied to his wife, "It's okay, just playing soccer with the guys. And Leka hit me in the head with a ball. I'll soon go to the hospital and work there." And the maid turned out to be a piece of crap. "I think you were right about her inappropriate behavior and begging for tips all the time. I'll send her away once and for all." Adriana was very surprised at her husband's reaction to the maid, for she thought he liked Betty very much. After all, he'd done all the candidates for her alone. But the wife was tired of wandering around hospitals and dealing with domestic issues, so she decided to take care of her beloved and said, "Come here, I will treat your wound, and then together we will go to the hospital and make you an X-ray." The man breathed a sigh of relief and smiled sadly. When his wife came to him, he immediately embraced her and said, "You've come at last." When the couple returned from the hospital, it turned out that the man had a concussion. She carefully put her husband to sleep and forbade him to work for the next week, while she herself reflected on the doctor's words. The doctor claimed that a sword wouldn't have left such a deep wound. It was clearly something sharp and metallic. The businessman's wife began to ponder why the man she loved had harmed her. But suddenly it occurred to her that Michael might have gotten into a bar fight and covered it up so she wouldn't worry. But Adriana's illusions about her husband's decency were dispelled an hour later. She received a call from Betty's maid and asked to meet at the cafe to discuss some terrible incident. And her main condition was to come without her husband and not to tell him anything. At first, Adriana wanted to wake up her husband and ask him what was wrong. But her intuition told her that first she should go to the cafe and discuss everything with Betty. That way, she could get to the truth. Opening her spouse with a blanket, the woman put on her favorite gray business suit and heels, then promptly advanced toward the cafe. When Adriana approached the coffee shop and went inside, the maid was already there. She immediately waved to Michael's spouse to get her attention. As she approached the table, Adriana noticed that the maid's neck was practically all blue, as were her arms. She felt uncomfortable, so she sat down on the nearest table and started asking the former employee questions from the get-go. "Why did you call me and ask me not to say anything to my husband? What good would that do you?" Betty smirked sadly and began his story. Adriana listened to her for about an hour, and she felt uncomfortable with the maid's story. She was desperate to justify her husband, so she asked another question, "And why should I believe you and not my spouse?" Betty skimmed her eyebrows and instantly replied, "Why not? Didn't he have something like this in his past? Think back, strain your memory." After the maid's words, and Adriana sank into her memories, Michael, in the first year of acquaintance, told her one terrible secret. During a vacation by the sea, the man told his beloved that in the past he had terrible outbursts of aggression. He strangled all his former women. And once as a student, he grabbed a prostitute so hard by the neck that she almost died, and then disappeared. No one could ever find her. When Adriana was able to get out of the memories, she decided to tell the maid the truth, not suspecting that the girl would want to put her husband in jail and take most of his money. And Adriana was so much worried about Betty's story that she decided to leave the cafe and be alone. The wife began to think about divorce. Of course, she loves Michael, but he's just been acting so disgusting for the last year, and the cheating and strangling story is just too much. Even though Adriana came from a wealthy family, she was scared to divorce Michael, especially after the abuse. She secretly called a lawyer and decided to gather all the documents as well as her belongings. and Adriana went to extreme measures so that it was possible to escape from her husband's lair without negative consequences. The maid, on the other hand, had recovered from the shock and acted rationally. She memorized the surname, first name, patronymic of a former girlfriend, Michael, and found her in social networks, and then arranged a meeting. As she did when she went to beauty salons on the internet, it was not difficult to pay for one trip to the masseur. All the more the girl realized that her efforts would pay off in a few hours. Betty and Kathy were already lying on the massage table. Near the end of the treatment, the maid spoke, and Michael's ex was shocked. After hearing the story to the end, Kathy decided to support the girl and help her by talking about her past and Michael. Back in college, when Michael was quite frail but insanely polite, Kathy fell in love with him. She had Caucasian and Russian roots at the same time, so her upbringing was very strict. She looked for a man according to certain criteria. Kathy tried to find a faithful, intelligent, and wealthy. And when she found one, she was overjoyed. Even as a student, Michael could throw money around. After all, his parents provided him with everything. At first, everything was fine in Kathy and Michael's relationship, but one day he quarreled with the teacher and he failed him, and then sent him for retesting. That was a day Kathy would never forget. At first, the girl thought it was strange that the man smiled at her fake smiles. Then he laughed at her sad stories, and at the funny ones. He almost cried that day. And towards evening, he simply attacked from behind and began to strangle Kathy. Then, very much frightened and barely broke free. What scared the girl the most was that when Michael let go of her neck, he looked indifferent and empty. It was like, if I died, he wouldn't care. Betty finished her story, puzzled by the girl's inaction, and asked, "Why didn't you go to the police?" Adriana sighed sadly and answered, "I was afraid of the judgment of society. I wasn't supposed to date a Russian. And then this happened. My father would have killed him." Betty tried to digest the information and continued, "Did you hear about the missing prostitute, Kathy?" She nodded and answered, "Yes, I had, but I was sure before you told me that it was just rumor and speculation. Now, I don't know what to believe. There was a girl at our university, so to speak, of easy behavior. Not that she worked unofficially, more for fun. She helped our guys get rid of their fears and perverted fantasies. So in her 20s, she'd had a taste of everything. It would have gone on like that if she hadn't met Michael. One day at a student party, everyone gathered and celebrated Russia Day in the dormitory. Then Michael got alone with this Christina, and the next morning she was found unconscious. Her whole neck was bruised and cut. The guys ran to call an ambulance and the police on the street, because in the dormitory at that time the connection was bad. Or maybe there were some plugs. Having called the relevant services, the guys returned with a calm soul, but her body was missing. Whether she's alive or dead is still unknown. Many were convinced that Christina simply woke up and ran away. Allegedly, she was ashamed. Betty was horrified to hear the story and could only squeeze the following out of herself. "It's brutal. Do you know the girl's parents? Friends? I really need to find witnesses for a rape case. He's bribing the police. If I don't find Christina, you can come forward." Adriana nodded and whispered, "Yes, I'll help you. But it's important that my identity is not revealed until after the trial." A few weeks passed. The maid had already tracked down a few witnesses, but she wasn't sure of their reliability. But all the stories of the girls she'd interviewed pointed to one Michael as a maniac. It was only a matter of time before he snapped and escalated his aggression. And in 3 weeks, she managed to pack up all her belongings and documents and smuggle them out to a new home. She was lucky. When her father found out what kind of monster lived with her daughter, immediately started looking for a new place to live and found it, and then bought it for his daughter, formalizing it for himself. The woman decided to announce the divorce over the phone, but fear and excitement before the conversation did not go anywhere. Calling Michael at work, she began the dialogue. "First of all, hello. We need to have a serious talk with you." The man was surprised by the serious tone of his wife, but did not pay much attention to it. All because after the girl came back from the hospital and her behavior was quite strange, it felt like she was just avoiding him. Since Michael was busy at work, he replied like this: "Hello, my love. What's wrong with you? You're sick again." The girl rolled her eyes as she sat on the new bed in her house and irritably continued, "No, I'm not sick. You see, I don't want to be with you anymore. I think we should get a divorce." Suddenly, laughter was heard on the line. Michael thought Adriana was joking. Their marriage was perfect. If it wasn't for the girl's illness, there would be no problems at all. Therefore, he issued the following text after catching his breath. "Today, what's April 1? Nice prank, but let's get down to business. I'll come to work to get dinner on the table." By the way, and Adriana was dumbfounded by the insolence of her husband, but realized that it was a defensive reaction. That's why she replied like this: "My dear husband, I filed for divorce today. I'm not kidding. And this is no joke. I hope that you will be able to let me go quietly and without scandal." Suddenly, the man was seized by rage, and he abruptly threw a few phrases into the tube. "Then your things will be in the garbage tonight. No more scandals. You won't get a dime from me." Adriana surprisingly did not react to the threat and continued, "I have already taken my things and documents. Bye." After these words, the girl disconnected and put the phone away. Michael was furious. After one time, he was so seized by emotions that he decided to take revenge. First of all, he aimed at the secretary and decided for himself that tonight he would have a stormy night. And after that, he will take care of his already ex-wife. Inviting the secretary Anna home for a cup of tea, he took advantage of her trust in him and slipped her Aphrodite. So even before the action of the means, the girl began to flirt with the man and pulled into bed. After a stormy night, the businessman still could not calm down. After all, he was abandoned by 2 girls in a month. Thinking a little, Michael realized why his wife had run away so abruptly. His eyes were gushing blood. He grabbed the sleeping woman and started strangling her in his head. The picture loomed as he strangled the maid, and she died. Anna suddenly opened her eyes. Her neck ached, and she was desperately short of breath. She tried to push the man away, but she couldn't succeed. It seemed to her that this was the end. At this point, Betty had already filed a police report with the rest of the victims. A few days later, the report was accepted and an investigation began. The criminal case was influenced not only by the testimonies of several girls, but also by the disappearance of Michael's secretary. After the employee spent the night with her boss, she was never seen again. Her parents filed a missing persons report because she was going to visit her supervisor, but never returned home. Betty rejoiced and cheered. After all, the victory and the cherished money were very close. However, it seemed strange to her that the man always controlled himself and then took and killed a girl who worked in his firm. It was not logical or prudent for a successful businessman, but her heart this time said it was possible. The fact is that he is just a psychopath and does not know how to control emotions. While the former maid was pondering Michael's motives, he was sitting in an interrogation and proving his innocence. "I don't deny that I overdid it with Kathy when I was a student, but she forgave me. And the maid put an alarm clock to my head harder than I choked her. I even have a certificate, and the other exes here have testified to revenge violence. Yeah, I love those S&M showers, but I warned a lot of people about this beforehand. As for Anna, I didn't kill her. I'm not stupid enough to take a fall at work. Everyone knew she was coming with me. Why would I do something like that?" Justified Michael. The investigator looked at the man carefully and continued asking questions. "Who told you that the girl was killed?" "She was just put on the wanted list. But for the attempted strangulation of other women, you will have to answer one way or another. It's either jail or probation with restitution. A lot depends on your lawyer and your sanity." The man put his hand to his forehead, wiped his face, and quietly answered the police officer. Yeah, I got it. I'll reimburse them for all the damages. I'll give them the money. I'm not going to run from responsibility, but you need to let me go. I got a lot of work to do. I have to pay them back somehow." The investigator tapped the papers on the table irritably and threw a few sentences. "We'll let you out in 2400 hours, but until then, you stay here. If we don't find anything in your house, we'll let you go." As soon as the investigator came out of the interview, Michael mimicked the police officer by repeating his last line and grimaced. The investigator was sure that Michael was not involved in Anna's kidnapping and possible murder. But all the evidence and testimonies do not work in his favor, especially since in the past one of his acquaintances had already disappeared, and after that 2 more girls with whom he secretly almost cheated on his wife, but did not have time. About the latter knew only the employees of the department. Conducted a search in the house of Michael, did not give anything to the investigation, so the man was released on his own recognizance, pending the outcome of the investigation. Everything was quiet and calm until the trial. Before the start of the trial, Michael caught up with Betty and the victims to say the following: "I realize that I have done wrong in the past. I regret that I tried to hurt you and that I did not get treatment for my outbursts of uncontrolled aggression. I signed up for therapy. I'm trying to change. You don't have to ruin my life. I'll pay whatever it takes. I don't want to go to jail for a murder I didn't commit." His eyes filled with tears. Looking at Michael, the victims began to doubt that he was involved in Anna's kidnapping, but not Betty. The girl had mentally made up her mind. For her, Michael was guilty, and that was it. Betty looked at the businessman and answered for everyone. "I don't know how I can let you go after all you've done. At first I only wanted money, and now I dream of putting you away. Your secretary is missing, and I can't trust you anymore. Maybe I'll take the case to its logical conclusion, and you'll finally go to jail." During the trial, Adriana walked down a winding road, wearing a black suit and falcon heels. After making a couple of laps, the girl walked down a garage cooperative in the woods. Going inside one of the garages and closing, Adriana took out some plates and mugs. She filled the plates with food and the crumbs with water. Then she stepped back, opened the basement, and turned on the lights, put the dishes on the tray, grabbed it, and began to slowly make her way downstairs. As the girl slowly made her way down the stairs, not only could you hear the unpleasant consciousness, but also the mooing of the women sitting on the chains that were in the room. Fully descended, and Adriana looked around at her nieces and laughed, saying, "Time eat up, darlings. I'm sure you've already made friends with the new girl. Her name is Anna. She was Michael's secretary, and she really enjoyed sleeping with him." After feeding, Adriana was about to gag the last one, but she wouldn't let her. At first she just asked for help in screaming, and then she became attracted with Michael's spouse. "You're a sick psychopath. You realize Michael doesn't need you. Why you're kidnapping women? Why do you keep me here? I don't give a shit about your husband. I was only trying to warn you. I slept with him before you two even officially met." And she looked at Christina carefully and spelled out every word and phrase. "Listen to me carefully. When I first started dating Michael, you came running to me with pity stories about him being a strangler. I told you I wasn't interested, but you wanted support. You started urging me to file a complaint against your beloved husband. After all, you poor thing, you had to hide from him for months like you were afraid to. And I didn't care if you were the one coming on to me. Michael was mine. And I liked him before I met him. I saw him at university and I loved him at first sight. And you made him dirty, you ruined him. I had to put up with so much because you don't know anything about love. He loves me. He hasn't even strangled me once. That proves the fact that I'm the love of his life. And you guys are just doormats. I was sure I wouldn't forgive cheating. So I protected our marriage many times from this. But in the case of Betty, I failed. Unfortunately, I can't bring her here yet. But someday her corpse will be lying here. And if she misbehaves, I'm sure that if I can tell my beloved husband the truth about myself, and he confesses to me about the cheating and strangling, our marriage can be saved." Christina grimaced at the words, and Lena, beginning to realize that in front of her is a psychopath that cannot be cured, and spat back, "Yes, you're the perfect couple. I can't argue with that." Strangler and face snatcher. Adriana smiled wickedly and added, "Wait, it's not over yet. Our new girl, Anna, may have to be killed." After these words, Michael's wife taped Christina's mouth with duct tape and climbed the stairs upstairs. The girls won the trial, but Michael's lawyer didn't waste any time either and got him a suspended sentence. The businessman exhaled and calmed down as he left the courtroom. But then Betty flew up to him again and started talking. "You're not getting away from me that easy. You have to answer for killing that girl. You're a maniac." The man became sad again and answered, "I'm not a maniac. Do you understand or not? I'm going to the clinic, and I don't care if you believe it or not. Move aside and let me pass already." The girl blocked the man's way and continued, "No, I'll go to the media. No one will want to work with a maniac. Everyone will find out, and even your wife." Michael felt anger rising to his heart. He wanted to wring the girl's neck, but he pulled himself together and said, "Listen to me carefully. You're a fool. Buy if I want. It is you no one and nowhere will not take. And about my wife, she is no longer my wife. And it's all thanks to you. I've already realized that you're the one who told her, all kinds of nonsense." She filed for divorce. Betty calmed down and shut up. Realizing that it was useless to prove anything to the former teacher, the girl decided to take revenge silently, so she turned around and left. A few weeks later, Betty went to the media and told the horrible story of how the maniac was released because of insufficient evidence. After that, the maid even went on various shows. On each of them, she described in color what it was like to work in the house of a maniac. Michael began to have problems at work. A lot of people started canceling contracts with him. People really believed that the businessman was a maniac who could buy his way out of jail. The man ordered disproving articles and then also began to star in the show. But it didn't help. He was recognized on the street and thought to be a murderer because of the media's delusional articles. Anna's parents also kept up with him and continued to sue him. After all that happened, Adriana realized that it was time to return to her husband and support him. After all, he has already answered for his treason. It remains to tell him his secret, and their love will blossom again as before. Before going to her husband, the girl again visited her nieces and this time decided to have a longer conversation, not with Christina, but with Anna, who worked at Michael's secretary. After Anuta felt that her mouth was no longer covered by Scotch tape, she rejoiced and tried to take a full breath. Then, with pleading eyes, she looked at Adriana and asked to be let home. She promised to disappear and not tell anyone anything. Anna only asked for one thing: to let her escape. Adriana smirked imperceptibly and replied to the secretary, "I am not angry with you as I am with Christina, but you slept with my husband. Therefore, you must answer for your deed. However, there is a good chance that you are the one I will let go. But before I do, I want to ask you a few questions. Sweet Anna, how good is my husband in bed? Why did he decide to sleep with you?" Asking the second question, Adriana took a knife out of her back pocket and ran the tip of it across the girl's face. Anna was horrified, but she said, "I don't know. That unfortunate day you called him and said something. I have no idea about the intimacy. I think he was more concerned about strangulation." After Anna and Adriana's words, things calmed down considerably. Then Michael's wife said the following: "That's right. I'm the one who announced the divorce. Yes, unfortunately, you were a victim of circumstance. I'll let you go soon, don't worry." Right after confessing my secret to my husband, suddenly Adriana started ripping the duct tape off each girl's lips and declared that she had made such an isolation that they could now scream forever and no one would hear them. After a few minutes, Michael's wife left food and drinks for the captives and then left altogether. But this time, she decided not to turn off the lights in the room as she realized that it was quite likely that one of them would soon die of exhaustion. Leaving the garage and getting to her car, Adriana got behind the wheel and pulled out her phone, dialing her husband's number. She started the first conversation. "Hi, Michael. I need to have a serious talk with you again. I've missed you, and there is one thing we should discuss in private." Michael was very surprised to receive a call from his almost ex-wife, so he picked up the phone without delay. And after hearing this, he said, "Of course, Adriana. I'll be glad to see you. Soon we will be divorced, but I missed you too. If anything, I drink cognac at home. Come on over." Then the man passed out and continued watching the horror movie, drinking alcohol. Adriana found herself outside his house. After an hour she knocked, and when no one opened, Adriana just used an old key and went in. Passing into the hall, the girl noticed that her husband was asleep. A bottle of cognac is standing next to him, and a horror movie is on the laptop. Adriana smiled sadly. Once upon a time, they used to watch movies together and fall asleep on this bed. They used to be the perfect couple. The girl cleaned the room and then walked over to her sleeping husband and covered him with the blanket again. After a little thinking, Adriana undressed, threw on her old robe, which was left in the closet, and lay down next to Michael, and then also fell into sleep. Michael woke up to a foul odor. Was it just him, or was someone cooking his favorite pie in the kitchen? Looking around, Michael noticed that the hall was cleaned up and his laptop was turned off. Suddenly, the man dropped a single word, "Adriana," into the void. His wife came into the room and replied, "Yes, darling, I am here. I know you need support right now." The girl further held out a pie to her husband, sat down next to him, and gently rubbed his head. Michael was very happy that his wife was home again. Everything was fine. As before, he was afraid to scare Adriana away, because everyone had stopped talking to him after the shocking news on TV. So he whispered, "Thank you." After the parade dined first, Adriana spoke. "I didn't come just to make you a pie. We really need to talk." Michael didn't realize what else his wife could say to him, so he answered her, "What exactly do you want to talk about?" "Adriana," he smirked and continued, "I know you didn't kidnap anyone just because I did." The man choked on the water he was drinking. And then Michael looked at Adriana with surprised eyes and said, "It's a strange joke." Suddenly, Adriana grabbed his face with her fingers. She stroked her chin and, in a serious tone, said, "I've ever made a joke in the last 10 years of my relationship with you. I'm not joking." At first, the victim was a college girl who everyone thought was a prostitute. When we started dating, she wanted to report you. I only did it to protect your reputation. Then I came across 2 others. Is that how you looked at them? It was obvious you might have cheated on me, and I saved our marriage. But the Anna situation was as much about revenge as filing for divorce. I think you need to come clean about some of the things you've done. Then we can rebuild our relationship, and everything would be just like it was before. Michael felt the ground swim away from under his feet after Adriana's revelation. His head was spinning, and he felt as if he were about to faint. Despite the fainting, the man replied to his wife, "My God, why did you do that? At least they're alive. Where are you keeping them?" Before Adriana could hear the answer, the man felt weakness in his body and fell back into bed. When he woke up, a few hours later, the man noticed that he was tied to his bed. The businessman also noted that he was wearing only his underwear. He just wanted to scream help, but suddenly the music came on and Adriana entered the room. In one hand, she held a knife, and in the other, a glass with cognac. She quickly listened to the glass and put it aside on the nightstand, and then climbed on the bed and sat on top of her husband. Michael was shocked, and for a second, he even thought he was paralyzed with fear. Strangely enough, there was no aggression towards his wife, perhaps because of the treatment in the clinic, or maybe from shock. The man, coming out of his thoughts, noticed that the girl was wearing a leather suit. Realizing that something wrong was going on, Michael tried to get through to his wife's mind. "Honey, I don't know what the women you kidnapped told you, but that's not what I wanted. I realize I've made a lot of mistakes in my marriage, but you can't kill me. Please just let me go." Adriana laughed and replied, "Stop it. Why kill me? They didn't kill you and I didn't kill you. I love you, darling, and I want you to tell me all your secrets." As a young girl suddenly took out a knife and began to run it down Michael's throat. Then she continued, "Well, tell me how you strangled them. Why did you do it? We need to save the marriage before it's too late." The man realized that his wife had just lost her mind. But how long it had been going on was unclear. Had he been dating a crazy woman all these years and then married her? Michael was determined that he needed to find out where the girls were in order to save them and his reputation. So he said, "I choked them out of aggression. All that recycling and a lot of alcohol. I'm cured now. You better tell me why you don't let those girls go where you keep them." After Adriana heard her husband's questions, she realized that this marriage could not be saved. So she lightly scratched her husband's neck with a knife and whispered the following in his ear. "Lenina, 12, Building 3, Garage 17. But I'll have to get rid of you too, just like them. But not today." Suddenly, Adriana got off her husband and untied him, and then slowly and quietly left the house. Michael did not dare to run after her and called the police, immediately telling the horror story about his wife and the kidnapped women. Initially, the man was not believed, but was obliged to check the garage. Police officers drove to the address, but when the garage door was opened to the operatives, it became clear that there were no kidnapped women. Michael was issued a ticket for false summons and asked to go to a psychiatric hospital, and Adriana was not surprised that the man tried to turn her into the police. But she was hurt that he did not even think about her words and immediately began to call the authorities. To kill Michael, the girl did not want to kill Michael, so she decided to just drive him crazy and take away the business. In a few days, the divorce. She will be a free woman again and will find an even more worthy groom than the previous one. After all, she already has someone in mind. Michael realized that Adriana was just mocking him and had lied. The man did not know how to outwit the psychopath. In his head, there was only one idea: to hire a private detective who would follow her and report everything to him, despite the fact that spending the last money on such a specialist did not want to. There was no way out. So the man took a risk and dialed the number of a private investigator. At that time, Alfred returned to Russia from another country to save their joint business with Michael. On arrival, the young man set about launching an advertisement. He presented everything as if Michael was suspended from work. And the main thing here, that there was no bad name behind the company. He hoped that after the advertising was launched, the building materials could be sold in the same volume as before. The day of the divorce came. Adriana and Michael couple divorced quickly and without many questions. Coming out of the registry office, Adriana looked at her ex-husband, smiled venomously, and said, "You know, I did so much for you. I saved you from prison, and you immediately wanted to give me up. You were never worthy of my love." Michael decided not to say anything. After all, he was waiting for the results of the private detective's work and hoped to put the psychopath in jail for a long time. Suddenly, Adriana turned around and walked off in the other direction. After his ex-wife left, Michael stood in the driveway and hesitated whether or not to call Betty. If this stubborn woman could get to the truth and save all the kidnapped. After all, she has already once been able to unearth the truth about him, which means that she will be able to bring Adriana out into the open. At this time, Michael's ex-wife has already arrived at the garage near the forest and wanted to go inside, as suddenly found that she was followed by a clumsy old man. The elderly man pretended that the neighboring garage belonged to him. Or it didn't get funny, because this is where all the garages of hers are. She had bought the whole garage cooperative years ago. Adriana pretended to feel sick, then suddenly collapsed to the ground, feigning an epileptic seizure. The private investigator was frightened and ran up to the shaking woman. Adriana continued to play the role of the sick stranger and in a trembling voice stated, "See, there's a black Jeep. Inside it are my epilepsy pills. The door to the car is open. Just find my bag. But hurry up, please." The man only had time to turn around before he suddenly felt a severe pain in his head and fell to the ground, immediately losing consciousness. Behind his body stood Adriana, who threw the bloody stone out of his hands and shivered. Suddenly, the woman interrupted the silence and answered herself, "A private detective, I guess. Yes, Michael. You really don't have much money left." Adriana dragged the poor old man to the other girls in the basement and also said with a chain. When the kidnapped ladies saw the elderly man with a bloody head, they started yelling and screaming. Adriana got tired of listening to their screams and sharply reprimanded Shut Up Already Alive. "Stop yelling. Today you have a celebration. It looks like Anna is going free." All the girls in the room looked at each other in surprise and fell silent. After a minute, Anna decided to break the silence and asked Adriana the following, "What do I have to do? I hope you won't kill me." Adriana waved her hand and replied, "I am not going to kill you. I have a business proposition for you. I have studied the biographies of all the girls, and you are the smartest among them. So I am sure that you will make the right choice and not let me down." Finished talking, and Adriana approached Anna and silently took off her chains. Then they went upstairs together. A few hours after the divorce, the man was already at the bar and drank an entire bottle of whiskey. It was only after the alcohol that he felt brave and decided it was time to call Betty. He needed her help. At first, Betty sent Michael as soon as she heard his voice in the phone and blocked all his incoming numbers. But half an hour later, the girl received a text from him with the following content. "I know I look like a stalker right now, but think to yourself. We can meet in a public place and talk calmly. It wouldn't be profitable for me to kidnap women. What about hurting you? You see the way I'm gargled on every show. I want to talk to you because I finally figure out who's been kidnapping my exes. It wasn't me. Yeah, I liked strangling ladies, but not kidnapping. Believe me, I know you are the only one who can bring this thing to light." Betty was very surprised by the message she received. There was something genuine in Michael's words, and the text itself was desperate. However, her heart desperately did not want to believe him. In her head, the following text was spinning: "Just delete the message and forget about it like a bad dream. After all, you already got the money and cured your neck." While Betty was thinking about whether or not to help her former employer, a breaking newscast began on the television. The correspondent told the following. Anna found the girl decided to put an end to the story of the maniacal businessman. She stated that Michael Salisbury kidnapped her like the others. But one day he felt bad, and she managed to escape. Her parents still can't believe their daughter managed to wrestle the keys from the maniac's hands to run out into the street and go to the police. Betty was shocked at the news. After all, just now, the man had been calling and texting her. Is he really stupid enough to reach out to his former victims on the day one of the abductees escaped, or is someone skillfully setting him up? But why would the secretary lie? It was obvious that the girl, Alder Udally, was a captive. After a short thought, Betty decided to meet Anna and then to visit Michael in prison. After all, now he really faces a big sentence, and no amount of money will not save him. At first, Betty couldn't get a hold of Anna. She knew her cell phone number and her work number because she sometimes came to work with Michael. Also, the receptionist would sometimes call from her cell phone herself and relay cooking cleaning errands. Surprisingly, when Betty called the work phone, she didn't pick up the phone. The secretary was reluctant to say anything at first, but then told Betty a little pity story. And a story was full of inconsistencies, and it was unclear how the man had managed to keep a huge number of women on chains at the cottage and how he had managed to move them all to another place. Immediately after Anna's escape, Betty began to suspect that the secretary was lying. But why was she doing it? It remained to be seen. In order to find out the full picture of what had happened, the girl decided to call Michael, but his phone was out of range. So Betty changed her clothes and called a cab directly to the police station. When she arrived, the girl found out from the investigator that Michael is now under interrogation, and then he will be placed in a detention center. If Betty paid a little, they would be allowed to talk even before being transported to another department. The former maid was not greedy, so she agreed. After the man came out of interrogation, they were allowed to be alone in one of the department's rooms. I'll make the conversation clear right away. I'm not going to save you. I don't feel sorry for you either. But it's obvious that your secretary Anna is lying. Why would she do that? That's the question. I'm starting to doubt that you've been kidnapping girls. But then who are you to say I'm the only one who can bring this thing to light? Michael looked insanely tired. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and sighed disappointedly, and then answered, "It's my wife, or rather ex-wife." "Well, have you met her?" "She herself came to me before the divorce and said that this secret should restore our relationship and take it to the next level. Compared my strangulation to the kidnappings, said we had to reveal our secrets. I was hungover, feeling terrible. She shocked me with her revelation. All I could do was call the police, but she gave me the wrong address. I realize now that I was in a hurry, and it was all just a test. Adriana couldn't see if I could be trusted. Now she's taking revenge and trying to make me look like a maniac and a lunatic." Betty hesitated a little at Michael's words and looked intently into the man's eyes. It was easy to see the despair and sadness in them. Inside, the girl had a strong feeling that this time Michael could be trusted, so she said, "And how can you prove all these words? Can't you at least have cameras with a sound recorder?" Michael shook his head and whispered, "I've said the same thing several times already. I tell the cops first, and now you don't have any cameras. Otherwise, how would I be able to make love to you in the morning? She'd be watching me all the time. It wouldn't be a marriage, it would be a nightmare." The man paused briefly and then continued, "Only you can find proof that she's behind the kidnappings. You'll have to dig into her past. And then I'm sure we can find some leads with you. I told the coroner I hired a private investigator to follow her. And he disappeared too. But he laughed at me and told me I was just getting screwed out of money. That's a clue too. What happened to the nice old man I paid off? It would be very easy to canvass his acquaintances and find out if he was missing." Betty looked at Michael perplexed and said, "Why should I help you?" The man shrugged his shoulders and replied, "Well, you came here, so you care about these women. You've already stood up not only for yourself, but for others once. You can do that not for me, but for them." Betty smiled and said thoughtfully, "That's manipulation on your part, of course. But you're partly right, the girls need help. I'll check into Adriana's background, but a little later. And by the way, before I go, answer me one question." The man was pleased that Betty had agreed to help, but tried not to show it. After a brief silence, the man asked what the question was. Betty made a serious look on her face and continued, "Why didn't she kidnap me? Why did she lock everyone in a back room somewhere, but not me? Why would she tell me about your exes?" The man laughed and said, "Well, it's simple. She thought the affair was all my fault. She was sick, and I hired a maid and slept with her. The others were all over me, but not you. Yes, no doubt you annoy her, but you haven't crossed her yet." After the last words, the girl decided to end her conversation with Michael and left the room. She still had to dig into Adriana's past and find out if the private investigator Michael had hired was missing. Thankfully, the man had given her the keys to his house. When they talked to the police and find out who the private investigator was, it was not difficult, nor was it difficult to determine Adriana's past last name. At this time, Adriana decided to set up her personal life. Her ex-husband was over and she was lonely. Therefore, Adriana began to act decisively. She met with a co-worker of Michael named Alfred and complained about the fact that she had wasted most of her life on a maniac. She also tried to console the man because his best friend turned out to be a psychopath. Alfred immediately believed Adriana because they had communicated before, and he always thought that Michael did not appreciate her, and Adriana was a beauty. She had 2 higher educations and was an excellent cook. What more did he need? Alfred thought. The answer lay on the surface. After all, it turned out that Michael was a maniac. Logically, such a woman would not be appreciated only by a psycho, and Adriana realized that Alfred would fall for her pretty quickly and was already counting on a new marriage. It remained only to think of a way to seduce a man, because in her house very much lacked male hands. So the girl said goodbye to Alfred, called a cab to the shopping center, and went shopping. What better than a beautiful dress and perfume can emphasize a woman's sexuality? That's right, nothing. Betty at that moment ran into Michael's house and took his laptop. As soon as the young maid put the device in her bag, she left the man's mansion and started hailing a cab. After arriving at her hometown courtyard and reaching her apartment, Betty felt her legs buzzing with fatigue and moaned in pain. A little from lying on the bed, the girl turned on her former employer's laptop and began searching for the information she needed. Michael's deal with the private investigator Betty found quite quickly through the browser history. Also, the girl immediately studied all the background of the detective with the help of a program that a friend from the computer club had installed for her. A private investigator named Rick never set up any of his clients. If he took on any case, he did not back down to the last. That surprised Vetu, so she ran him through search engines and social media. It turned out that Holland had indeed gone missing a couple days ago, and relatives were very concerned that the man wasn't in touch and his phone was disconnected. After Betty found out about Rick's disappearance, she managed to squeeze out only a few phrases. Yeah, I don't have a lot of options. Either Michael and Adriana are a couple of maniacs conspiring to drive me crazy, or Michael kidnapped that detective and killed him, and then started telling me stories. Of course, there is a third option, which I don't want to believe, that his wife is really doing all this. But why? Next, the girl had to find out Adriana's past, and it had to start with her last name. After 3 hours of searching, Betty found nothing and dozed off. And then came the next day. Betty had nightmares in her dream all night. Michael and Adriana turned out to be cannibals who were trying to eat the poor maid who didn't have time to make them lunch. After the girl opened her eyes, she first breathed a sigh of relief and then laughed. However, the search had to continue. There was no telling what else she would dream about this week. Betty decided to change the direction of the search and looked into the background of Adriana's parents. She finally found the last name of her ex-wife, Michael. Adriana used to go by the last name Babkina. At first, knowing the suspect's last name didn't help her. But suddenly, the maid had the idea to check her data with a broomstick, and it was the right decision. Later, it turned out that Adriana in the past regularly visited one medical institution. Mostly psychologists, psychiatrists, and neurologists worked there. Betty made the assumption that Adriana had seen a psychiatrist, which meant that the only thing left to do was to visit her primary care physician and find evidence of Michael's ex-wife's guilt. Betty felt that she was close to solving the mystery, especially when she was already standing on the threshold of the clinic. Gathering her courage, the girl went inside. Betty then asked the receptionist to call all the psychiatrists at the clinic. Allegedly, she was having a seizure and was on the verge of suicide. All the available doctors at the clinic came running to the screams of the crazy client. Betty went a little overboard in her portrayal of a psychopath. At first, she was talking nonsense, but at the end she added that she would only be treated by the doctor who had saved her friend Adriana. One thin and tall brown eyes, and the psychiatrist waved his hand, and then said, "Well, then stop yelling. You found someone who will save you. And so has Adriana." Betty was glad she had gotten her way and responded well. "And we can start the reception already." The man nodded and led her to his office. When they entered the small room and the door closed, Betty panicked. After all, she had a meager imagination, and the psychiatrist was clearly expecting a story from her. The girl remembered the latest movies about psychopaths and began to retell the plot from the movie. The doctor did not notice it and began to participate in the conversation. At the end of the appointment, the girl asked if the psychiatrist had lied to her. The man replied sternly that he never lies. Betty realized that the man would not tell her directly about Adriana's affliction, so it was necessary to keep him busy with something for a few minutes to look for her card in the office. The girl lied that she was allergic to the dust in the room and asked for an urgent search. The psychiatrist was scared for the patient's health and retreated to the front desk for medication. At this point, Betty started checking all the lockers and found a file on Adriana. Quickly stashing it in her bag, the girl sat down in her former seat and tried to hide her joy as best she could. When the doctor came back and gave her a pill, she defiantly drank it and went out into the common room. Then Betty quickly paid for the appointment by card at the reception desk, went down the stairs to the street, called a cab, and went home. When she arrived at the address and entered her apartment, she immediately threw off her outerwear, sat on the bed, took out Adriana's file, and started reading. Betty felt like a real detective. The girl felt as if she was starring in a cool movie. But her positive emotions were replaced by horror when she got to the information about Adriana's diagnosis. The girl's dossier said that she suffers from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and split personality. The most amazing thing was that all of these diagnoses had been checked and confirmed by an entire panel of doctors. She had seen about 5 psychiatrists prior to meeting Michael, and no one had been able to help her. On several occasions, doctors had noted that she refused to take her pills and was having terrible breakdowns. After reading the last lines in Betty's file, smirked and said, "Yes, you and Michael are worth each other. But I guess he didn't lie to me. Adriana is indeed behind the kidnappings of the other women. But how do I prove it? We're gonna have to follow her. There's a good chance it could end badly for me. Maybe I should just drop the whole thing and move far away to visit my parents, for example." The girl continued to think out loud. After a little rest and thinking, Betty decided to visit Michael one last time. The girl was sure that it was this man who should motivate her to continue the investigation. Or would she just leave town and forget about Adriana's dossier? At this time, the psychiatrist wanted to re-examine Adriana's file, as he was determined to understand why her friend had come to him. After all, he was the one who couldn't help Adriana. Neither could the other doctors. When he discovered the file was missing, the man immediately called his former patient to report the theft. "Hello, Adriana. A crazy woman showed up today claiming to be your friend. After the appointment, she stole your chart with your diagnosis. I realize we have to maintain confidentiality, but please don't sue us. Here's her last name, first name, middle name Betty." Adriana sighed irritably and replied, "Don't worry, Sam, it's true. My friend, just in addition to her neurosis, she's also suffering from Anna's clip. I'll take care of it myself. Thanks for letting me know." After that, the angry girl hung up the phone and started looking for her kidnap case. And after collecting the suitcase, Adriana called a lawyer and asked him to draw up some papers. An hour later, Adriana was already standing outside her garage. Parked the car. She went inside and went down to the basement. The kidnapped girls, as well as the detective, lay in utter exhaustion on the floor. Seeing the disappointing picture, the girl laughed and said, "Shit, I forgot to feed you. But at least you have a private toilet, shower, and sink. I think you have been given the best accommodations." Suddenly, Adriana was silent for a moment and then continued, "Do you want to get out of here today?" All the girls nodded, but the man only managed to raise his hand a little. And Adriana grinned and began to talk about her offer. But who would have doubted that everyone would agree? "You must sign the papers I will give you on these papers. You have participated in a social experiment voluntarily. The essence of the experiment is that experts conclude in the course of work how long people can live in the basement on chains and how it affects their health, both physical and psychological. Of course, you will be paid for this. After all, the experiment was voluntary, wasn't it?" My dears, everyone said yes. Adriana laughed again and remarked, "Your voices should be more joyful. Today you will go free." The teacher went around the room and held out pens to everyone. And then the contracts. When everyone had signed the contract, Adriana began to remove the chains from the girls and then got to the detective as well. Two exhausted beauties under the hand of the private detective headed for the exit at once. But Christina did not want to leave and asked Alina, "I don't believe in your kindness. You're just going to let everyone go. Is this contract really that good for your rights?" Adriana raised her head proudly and replied, "Christina, are you really that stupid? Run away while you have the chance. Or do I need to renew your contract?" The teacher suddenly smiled predatorily. Christina looked at Adriana incredulously and threw a few last phrases, "And I'm already leaving. But my heart tells me that there's something fishy going on here. There's a reason why you were so quick to get rid of us." Adriana laughed again and said, "Do you want me to spare you a thought? I just found a new man. No more mistresses, only decent husbands." After the teacher laughed, Christina did not listen to her anymore and quickly went up the stairs to the exit. The next day came. Betty woke up in a great mood. After all, she had found out the truth, and now she would be able to save the girls, even if Michael didn't convince her to help him. She could always leave an anonymous message for the police. However, the girl decided not to watch TV today for nothing. After all, the television told what happened to the missing ladies. It turned out that they took part in a secret social experiment, and one of them is now fabulously rich. The same Christina is a student, moonlighting in the excursion, and became a millionaire. The whole point is that she took part in the experiment the longest. The others were only there for a couple of months, and she more than 5 years. The experiment was conducted by Rubicon, a company not registered not to Adriana, but to a certain Jack. After Betty dressed the bruised, born, she stuffed the phones, the dossier into her purse, and then headed for the police. She was once again lucky and was able to make an appointment with Michael at the department. When Betty and Michael were left alone together, a very amusing dialogue began. The first to speak was the girl. "Your ex-wife is really crazy. And it's well documented. I found her file. And you were right about the detective being missing. I don't know if I should pursue this case any further. I'm starting to realize that Adriana is a real danger to society. But if you pay me, I'll help you." The man laughed and replied, "Betty, haven't you seen the news? I'm in prison and I know what's going on." She released all the girls and the detectives too. He contacted me right after the escape, and Adriana made them all sign an agreement that they were in a social experiment. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't prove anything. She's got a rich family, and she makes good money selling real estate. And I'm about to be released too. Christina, my lawyer, accused me of slander. The girl claimed I was the one who kidnapped everyone. I'll be released in a couple days, and my father will give me my money back. But I'm not spending my blood money to get back at that crazy woman. I've had enough of her. I hope I can get my business back. But even if I get my business back now, I'll have to go to psychiatrists periodically for a long time because of the abuse allegations." Betty was stunned, and after a couple minutes she replied, "What am I supposed to do now? Forget about your crazy girlfriend. You should have thought about that a long time ago. Suddenly, you'll be normal." Having finished her speech, the girl grinned. From the recent events, Michael really changed inside and realized that he no longer wanted to show aggression. The man decided to make a fresh start after the clinic and prison. When he was accused of kidnapping, only Betty believed him. That's why he started to have feelings for her. Surprisingly, even the parents were sure that their son was a maniac, but not the former maid. Confessing his feelings, Michael was afraid, especially now, but he decided to take the hint. The man gently stroked the hand of Betty, who was sitting across from him, and replied, "Yes, I think you should leave Adriana alone. She's a psychopath, and probably has a narcissistic physical personality disorder. Take care of yourself and stay away from her. Maybe you should even go on vacation. I hope she doesn't find out you stole her file. Otherwise, Adriana won't just let you go." Michael paused for a moment and continued, "And if you need a friend or a man, you can always come to me. I'm grateful for your help, and I'll wire you as much money as you need as soon as I get out. Thank you, Betty." She was surprised to hear Michael's words, but she didn't show it. And noticing that the man grabbed her hand, the former maid freaked out a little and moved away from her former employer. After a moment, the girl calmly answered Michael, "Yes, you are right. It's better to leave the elite in the past. And about you, I don't think a relationship with you is a good idea. Sorry." Betty finished her speech, gathered herself, and silently left the office, and Michael felt his heart shattering into hundreds of pieces, but he realized that it was deserved, and there was no point in stopping the girl. Already leaving the office, Betty felt her heart beating frantically. For some reason, she was drawn to go back, but she overpowered herself. The man was still attractive to her, but after everything she had been through, she couldn't trust him. Certainly not after the abuse. She didn't see herself as a victim, and she didn't want to get caught up in the Carmona triangle. And anyway, she was doing all this for the money, wasn't she? Walking out of the police station, the girl felt defeated, so she looked at her phone and explored the neighborhood. There was a cafe nearby. She decided to head there. It's about time to get drunk, Betty thought. After walking through the dense park, she was only a couple of meters away from the unfortunate cafe. Her legs were already tired. Betty mentally berated herself for not calling a cab. It was pretty dark outside, and the girl thought for a second that a shadow had slipped past. She reassured herself that she was tired, and it was only the branches of trees flickering before her eyes. Suddenly, she heard a crunch and felt a wild pain in her head, and then a fog. Behind Betty's body stood Adriana with a cobblestone, who was muttering to herself, "I'm so sick of you, stupid maid. I should have put you on a chain right away." A few hours later, Betty woke up in the basement. Her head was groomed, and an anti-sanctions band-aid was visible on her hair. Turning around was hard, and the girl began to realize that she had been jammed with some sort of hard object, perhaps a cobblestone, and then dragged here. After some thought, the maid realized that Adriana was probably behind it. Betty even felt like laughing at the silliness of the situation. Just when she had decided to drop the investigation, Michael's ex-wife had decided to silence her. Reflection. The girls were interrupted by a mouthpiece or some sort of speaker limited to the wall, which was hard to notice at once. From the device came a woman's voice. "But hello, beautiful. You're awake at last. I had to sit with you for hours. But tell me, why did you mind your own business? You could have lived happily ever after. And after the strangling incident, vacationing on an island somewhere. But no, you had to steal my file. If I let the others go, I'd have to kill you. I was forbidden since childhood to reveal my real name or I'd be disinherited. And you're stupid. Stupid. Do you think I want to kill you? No, but you leave me no choice." Betty found it hard to think and speak, but she tried to answer. "Kill for the last name, but you're definitely schizophrenic. I don't give a shit about you and your family. I'm sick of you. I wanted to release the girls, and that's it. But you let them go. I was the last to know, and I was gonna drop the case. But no, you had to silence me." Adriana went into a frenzy. No one had ever called her sick. No one knew about her diagnosis, and now she wanted revenge. But time was short. "I'll deal with you later. Leave you for my sheepdogs to feed." "Oh, you didn't know I had dogs. They've been all over the place lately. I think you'd make a great steak." After that, the girl turned off all her devices and went to seduce her new fiancé. Alfred won't be waiting long. After all, there are plenty of single women who want him. Betty was cold and scared, especially after the words about the steak. She remembered her nightmare about Adriana and Michael being cannibals, and she felt uneasy at the mere thought that the dream would come true. At this time, Adriana was asking Alfred to evaluate all of her new outfits. A black, short and ruching dress with a power cutout, as well as a purple one with a slit up the leg. Well, the last variant of the updated closet also demanded the evaluation of a transparent dress made of a special film. The man laughed when he saw the third dress. Yes, he was certainly crazy about Adriana and her looks, but modern fashion scared him. The girl was standing in front of him in almost nothing but lingerie. And of course he wouldn't want her to wear that. What if she wore it to a party? Then she'd have a lot of suitors. Alfred advised me to keep only the first dress, as it fit her perfectly. When the girl smiled sadly and pouted her lips naively, the businessman could not stand it and ran up to his seductive. He then grabbed Adriana and pulled her to him, starting to kiss her lips greedily. A few days after the Passion Night, Alfred and Adriana Michael were released from jail. He felt great, free at last. Now it was possible to drink cognac at any time of the day or night, and to socialize again only with the people with whom one wanted to. Speaking of people, Michael missed his former maid very much, so he picked up the phone and called Betty, but the answer was only a dial tone. After Michael got home, the first thing he did was shower and eat, and then sat on the bed. There was no way the man could stop thinking about Betty. He just wanted to hear her voice or her laughter. So he dialed her number again. But this time the phone was already off. Michael was confused by the fact that the girl was ignoring him again. After all, they had agreed that after prison he would give her the money. So the man continued to call Betty without ceasing. And then the businessman decided to come to visit her. And the man found out the address quickly. It was not difficult for him to run the data about the maid through the service agency. Having received the desired address, the man called a cab and arrived at the place. Then he got out of the car, entered the entrance, and went up to the 4th floor. After knocking on Betty's door several times and seeing no response, Michael became frustrated and decided to leave. Just as the man began to descend the stairs, a neighbor came out and beckoned him over. The elderly woman stated that Betty had not been home for 4 days, and it was scaring her. Gino and Betty were not just neighbors, but one might even say friends. Betty visited her grandmother regularly, bringing her groceries and scrubbing her floors. The women bonded over their hatred of other neighbors who were getting drunk and debauched in the entryway. After communicating with his neighbor, Betty man was scared out of his wits. He was tormented by thoughts that the girl was kidnapped by Adriana. But Michael did not know what to do in this case, especially since recently in the police department he himself offered the girl to leave everything in this city and go away to rest. Michael made a decision. If Betty doesn't respond to his last text message, tomorrow he will run her number through military acquaintances and find out where her smartphone is. Waking up in the morning, the man wrote the following text to his favorite girl's number. "Hello, dear Betty. I am guilty of many things to you and will not impose on you again. Just say it's all right. That will be enough for me." In a minute, Michael's cell phone received a reply message, "Everything's okay, dear." The man looked at the smartphone screen in surprise. Betty, she never called him that. It wasn't her style. She liked to use a diminutive nickname. Adriana, on the other hand, just loved the word darling. Despite the promises he'd made to himself, yesterday Michael realized he wouldn't rest until he ran the maid's number. In the meantime, Adriana was snickering with the phone in her hands. Suddenly, she stopped briefly and moved closer to Betty, who was sleeping sweetly in the arms of the battery. The teacher gave her victim a little shake and asked, "And you always take so long to sleep? I have some news for you here." Betty opened her eyes wide and stared at Adriana. A moment later, coming to her senses, she asked, "What is it?" Adriana smiled predatorily and quoted her ex-husband's message, and then switched to Betty. "But what do you think of the message? My husband seems to have a crush on you." "Oh, ex-husband. Although who are we kidding? Status never stopped you. You know what the funny thing is?" Betty sighed and asked irritably, "And what's that?" Adriana rolled her eyes in response and said the following. Well, the funny thing is that he'll be calling and sending smiley faces to the corpse, or the piece of meat that will be lying in my dog's kennel. And I'll be telling him about endless love in the Bahamas, like I love him. I mean you, but I can't go back to him. There are only beautiful, tanned men around. Betty twirled the finger of his free hand at his temple and asked Adriana, maybe you should continue your treatment. I'm just a little sick of you. The girl was hungry and tired, so she continued to speak negatively. She started screaming. Let me go, you sick psychopath. I do not need your ex-husband and the new one. I don't care about anyone. And Adriana again felt a surge of anger and with all her might hit Betty in the face with the phone. She blacked out again, and the teacher said out loud, well, there you go passing out again. A few hours later, Michael's acquaintances from the military unit were able to trace the girl's number and called the businessman. They informed him that the phone was last online in the area of One Forest. There is another well-known garage cooperative there. The man decided to clarify who owns the cooperative, and when they told him that or not, everything fell into place. Michael decided not to call the police, but to go straight to Betty and save him and save her. He didn't trust anyone, especially after the incident with the charges in jail. Everyone but Betty had given up on him, so it was impossible to abandon her. Preparing his gun and knife, the man felt more confident and called a cab for the garage cooperative. Arriving at the place, Michael was horrified at the territory. It was about 10 garages, and outside it was gradually starting to get dark. Should I knock on every garage, or is it better to start shouting? Would it help? Michael pondered aloud. After 5 minutes, however, the man decided to try both methods in practice. Betty was lying unconscious on the basement floor. Suddenly, she heard a creepy man's screams through her sleep. The girl thought to herself, what a nasty voice. Forgetting that she was not at home, the girl tried to get up and yelled back before opening her eyes. What the hell for? Suddenly regaining consciousness from her own screaming, the girl realized that the man screaming outside was Michael, and he was looking for her. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach the man, Betty realized it was ineffective. It is likely that isolation has been carried out here, the girl thought to herself. There was a small battery and a toilet near Betty, so she had an interesting idea to use a chain to disintegrate the technical devices. Yes, it was a risky idea, but she had no choice. Betty hoped that Michael would hear the sound of water, or at least notice the puddle by the garage. Betty began to pound her chain with all her might, first on the radiator and then on the toilet. And she succeeded in getting her sanction. Cracks started to form, and Michael heard a noise. When Michael determined where the water would be, he admired the girl's ingenuity. But it was necessary to act decisively. Therefore, the man left sentimentality for later. He accelerated and tried to kick the door with his foot, but he failed. So Michael brought his gun to bear and punched the lock with it. And then he ran inside. But it turns out that getting inside is not the hardest part. There's still the basement to find. The man searched the place several times, but to no avail. He was about to call the police, but to dirty his hand with something sticky. So he went into the bathroom and noticed a strange faucet, which did not turn on and stood crooked. Michael hit it sharply. Suddenly, a secret room opened up. He went down the stairs to the basement and saw the wet cube jumping from behind the boiling water. Michael quickly oriented himself. First, he found the keys to the chain, then connected it from the girl's hand, and then dragged Vetu towards the exit. Once out in the open, the happy couple ran toward the road. When Michael caught a cab, he immediately took Betty to his house to protect her from Adriana's paw. At this time, Alfred rewrote Serioja's company to Adriana, and after signing the contract, the businessman looked tenderly into her eyes and said, "Will you marry me?" And Adriana answered the man without hesitation, "Yes, my love." "Well, wait a minute. I want to check something on my phone." The businessman nodded and said the following words, before retreating to the kitchen. "Okay, I'm very happy. My baby girl that you agree. I'm going to go. I'll pour us each a glass of champagne. Soon a new life awaits us without the old mistakes. Adriana smiled and waited until the man stepped away, and then turned on the video surveillance system on her smartphone. Seeing that the basement had flooded and the girl wasn't inside, we teacher couldn't help herself and sagged out loud. Alfred heard the mat from the lips of his beloved and jumped up to her with champagne. Holding out 1 line glasses, the man asked what's wrong. "Sweetheart." Adriana realized the need to lie and said, "Yes, the ex-husband is annoying. Still won't leave me alone. Well, you know him. Michael calls me every once in a while, and it's getting really annoying. You can help me deal with him." Alfred blushed with anger and replied, "Let's go. I'll beat him up." Adriana smiled enigmatically and threw back at him. "Let's go." Michael fed Betty some fruit and gave her his clothes from the closet. The girl went and changed her clothes and told Michael about the assault, and at the end of the story emphasized that she needed to go to the police today and file a report on Adriana. The former maid was convinced that it was time to end things with Adriana. If she didn't go to jail now, she was bound to kill someone. Michael, not thinking long enough, agreed. And just as the couple threw on their outerwear and hailed a cab, suddenly the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, the man sighed disappointedly and said out loud the following text: "Yes, we're here now, it seems, and ideas are hiding and call the police. And I'll deal with our guests. Tired of running from my ex-wife and her accomplices already. She may know how to piss on women, but she can't beat me in a fight." As Betty hid in the closet and called the police department, Michael suddenly opened the door and a loud rumble was heard. Apparently, someone had fallen and broken the dishes. Unfortunately, it was Michael who fell. Alfred knew where to hit, so he immediately aimed for the nose to get revenge on his fiancee's ex-husband. After the man who opened the door fell down, Alfred declared, "One more time you touch my sweetheart, and I will unscrew your head. She told me how you beat and strangled her. You're a maniac. You're not my friend anymore." Michael stood up, got ice from the refrigerator, and put it on his nose. When the bleeding stopped, Michael threw the ice away. He walked right up to his former friend, suddenly grabbed him by the head, and started slamming him against the wall. The elaborate brawl continued for about half an hour, and the police never arrived. Adriana was the first one who couldn't take it anymore. She pulled out a knife and told Michael to stop. But as soon as he stopped, Alfred got back into the fight. Then Betty couldn't stand it any longer and ran out into the corridor shouting, "Stop. Alfred, I may not know you, but you trusted the wrong woman. She's a maniac, and I have real proof." The men stopped fighting and stared at Vetu, and Adriana was about to stab the girl. And Adriana clenched her fists and then ran forward and swung at Vetu. But suddenly there was the sound of a gunshot. When Michael and Betty came home, the man handed her his gun so that she could always stand up for herself and no longer be afraid of Adriana. But no one knew that the girl would use it already today. When Betty saw the point of the knife, she reflexively pulled out the gun and fired. Everyone called an ambulance, but Adriana was beyond saving. The girl died from a direct shot in the stomach. Of course, together with the ambulance came the police. At first, Vetu, together with 2 angry men, were taken to the department, but then the girl was released. It was self-defense. Even Alfred confirmed the words of the former maid, although to the point of madness he wanted to avenge her for the death of the woman he loved. Betty was also acquitted in court. She provided not only video footage from Adriana's CCTV camera, but also data about her mental health condition. When Alfred learned the truth about his lover, he stopped hating Michael and Betty, and then even thanked them for saving his own life. Michael failed to win back his company from Alfred and Adriana's father, but the man opened a new company. Now the successful businessman sold not building materials, but medicines. Medicines began to bring much more income than the sale of building materials. After the incident, Michael and Betty became very close. They wanted to start a family and decided never to remember the past again, and especially Michael's outbursts of rage and Adriana's death. Michael became about husband cleaning and cooking, and in the house he decided to do his own chores. And Betty forgot flirting with strange men and finally realized her long-held dream. She married a rich businessman. 3 years later, the happy couple had a long-awaited baby boy. They named the boy Joy. The couple decided to bring up the boy strictly, so they tried not to spoil him with luxurious gifts and taught him to appreciate money. Betty revised her views on life after the birth of the child. She realized that never and under no circumstances should not get involved with a married man, even if it seems that the young man is ideal by all parameters. Behind his beautiful facade can hide a lot of unpleasant things. No one can tell you how many skeletons a couple has in their closet and what will happen to your life if you get involved in someone else's marriage. Betty may have gotten her way, but at what cost? Fights, kidnappings, murders. Not every girl would want to go through that to start a family with a rich businessman and have a child. And is the money worth the agony? Probably not. Betty married Michael not because of his financial status, but because the man saved her from his wife Adriana's monster and then showed her what caring and love are. You should only fight for a relationship if there are feelings there, and if there aren't, it's best to back off. It is likely that the married suitor already has a crazy Adriana of his own.